So, yes.
You talked about 9/11 and we were going to get canceled.
Oh, well, see, but I wasn't in town that day. I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be in town that day working in Lower Manhattan on Lafayette Street. But actually, a very close friend of mine and his family, his wife and his 2 daughters, were actually on the ground. And then the first tower came down, and you saw all the dust and stuff, and they got separated. Nobody could see anything. It was like opaque. Somebody came out of nowhere and grabbed my friend's wife and his daughter and lifted them up and the stroller and carried them away from World Trade Center Tower. She never saw who it was.
My guest this week is Christopher Knowles, but you may know him better on Twitter as Secret Sun Speaks. He runs a blog of the same name where he discusses what he calls synchromysticism. His thesis is that the major events that shape our reality are not random. They're orchestrated, because they're enactments of ancient religious rituals that have nothing to do with Christianity, and in fact, they're deeply opposed to the faith. All the world's a stage, as Shakespeare said in his famous play As You Like It, but Christopher might say, all the world's an altar, and what's being sacrificed on that altar, metaphorically speaking, is the Christian worldview. Rituals in opposition to the triune God are being practiced all the time, in the streets, on TV, in the headlines, and even in the architecture of buildings, as well as popular books and movies. The people who are doing this aren't secretive about it. It's just, we don't know what we're looking at. But when some of us start pointing these things out, we're called crazy conspiracy theorists. But I'll tell you what, I'd rather be a conspiracy theorist than an incompetence theorist or a coincidence theorist. Because if we're behind enemy lines, as C.S. Lewis said in Mere Christianity, then is it really wise to imagine that Satan is incompetent? Similarly, is it wise to imagine that he gets by on coincidence in a universe where Proverbs 16:33 says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord"? I thought not. So maybe it's time for those of us with ears to hear to begin listening to some of the researchers out there. And if you're looking for somebody, allow me to recommend Christopher from Secret Sun. Because what I discovered in this interview is that Christopher grew up devoutly Christian. As a child, he was part of a faithful church with an inspiring pastor during a formative stage of his life. I'll let Christopher tell the story and what happened after. It's a theme that's woven throughout this interview. And it's important because in a world of conspiracy researchers like David Icke, Graham Hancock, and Joe Rogan, finding one who believes in the one true and living God and his Son, Jesus Christ, was inspiring and refreshing indeed. In our conversation, Christopher and I discussed his background in the church, the pagan symbolism all around us, Lucifer, Mithras, and Perseus, the meaning of a church sanctuary, why strong men are a threat to empire, watcher worship and the ruling elites, human misery and the collapse of civilization, and finally, the happy ending of the Book of Revelation. If you enjoy the Renaissance of Men podcast, thank you. Please like this video, share it, and subscribe. Plus, leave a comment down below letting us know your favorite conspiracy theories. You can also support the show now on Patreon. So head over to patreon.com/renofmen where you can sign up for as low as $1 per episode. Also, get ready for some big news coming about the podcast very soon. And please welcome this week's guest on the podcast, the author of Our Gods Wear Spandex and the Secret Sun blog, Christopher Knowles. Chris, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Oh, great pleasure. Looking forward to it.
I've really enjoyed following your tweets on Twitter, or X, I guess, as they call it now.
I refuse to call it X.
I know. I can't bring myself to do it. So it's not that. But seeing the way that you tease out various themes from the news cycle, from things going on, to say, are you guys kind of paying attention to this? So I always find that really informative to pick up on details and news stories that I don't think a lot of other people see.
Well, the devil's in the details, right?
Amen.
you gotta pay attention to the details. That's how they get you. If you're not awake and aware of the things that are kind of being slipped into your consciousness, bad things can arise. You've always got to be kind of vigilant as what you're being fed, so to speak. So that's kind of, a large impetus behind the work I do.
And I want to talk about that because I think it's really important. A lot of people miss it. But first, I want to talk a little bit about your background. I got a little bit of a sense as we were kind of pre-gaming, but maybe you can talk a little bit about your history and how you came to be doing the things that you're doing now.
Oh, well, that's, I'm
Quite a
going to
story.
be 58 this year. It's like, you
Oh my
got to
goodness.
be a little more specific.
All right, well, let's go with recent past, like your time in the comic book industry, and then how you got into this field of, we'll call it synchromysticism, as well.
Well, not so much I mean, I did do some comic book work back in the 90s, but for most of my career, 25 years, ending in 2020, I was freelancing for Marvel Studios, working on all the stuff for the movies and
Oh,
everything.
the movie stuff. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Licensing and merchandising based on the movies. So I did a lot of artwork based on Avengers, Captain America, all these things. All these things that I'd kind of cut my teeth on growing up. And I pursued my dreams. They always say, pursue your dreams. It's like, I don't know if I think I probably would have been better off if I was like a carpenter or something.
Yeah. Right.
But, I mean, I raised my family. I raised three kids. I've got three adult children now.
Amazing.
And one grandchild and another one on the way. So I can't complain. It did a number on me. One thing they don't tell you in art school is that doing this work is strangely punishing on the body. And a lot of people who do illustration or cartooning or whatever get sick a lot, die young. I can't explain it. I don't understand the physiology behind it. But yeah, I mean, it was rough. It was rough. It was very stressful, but I really think that doing the work that I had done, which was very technical and very detail oriented, really helped me in the work that I do now, because I had to pay attention to details. I had to spend like hours and hours and hours just looking at a single image, and like trying to find the faults and the imperfections and all these kind of things. So it really helped me train my eye. It's like I have a very highly trained eye for detail, but also for meaning and also for symbolism, And one of the things that I try to make people aware of, and I think that Christians should be aware of, is that we're constantly being bombarded with religious imagery. It's just that it's not a religion that people are necessarily aware of, It's a range of, for lack of a better term, because I don't think the word is descriptive, but a range of pagan religions.
Yep.
That the symbols, and even in superheroes, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wrote Our Gods Wear Spandex. But I was really made aware of this, funnily enough, by working for Marvel. So Marvel, when I first started out, they're actually a licensor called Toy Biz, okay? And they were on like 2nd Avenue and 38th Street. So I had to walk all the way from like Grand Central Station or whatever, all the way down there. And I really got to know that whole area around that, Grand Central, which is just a huge pagan temple, if you're familiar with that building.
I've been there, but I don't know that I knew.
It's got Hermes and the whole Pantheon on the front of it and so on. But,
Amazing.
If you just walk through those neighborhoods, you're going to see this. You go into these lobbies of these buildings. I mean, they are like pagan temples. And that was really that experience, being on the ground, walking through New York City every day, and just seeing all this symbolism that I recognize from my interest in mythology and stuff, and seeing it, not being used as just sort of decorative, but devotional. And it really got me to realize that people in positions of power do not believe the same things that people outside of those quarters of power believe.
That's right.
And they're very serious about it. They don't spend all this money and time and effort putting all the symbolism into their buildings and their other expressions of their work, their corporate logos and so on, for giggles and grins. They do it because they believe it. And the best example of this, and if you're ever in New York, just go to Rockefeller Center, because it's just an open air pagan temple. Okay.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean? And, you have that big quote unquote Prometheus statue near the ice skating rink. That's actually a very classical depiction of Mithras. Mithras rising from the rock, holding the flame, escaping the bonds of time, which is the zodiac that's wrapped around. That has nothing to do with Prometheus. The only thing it has to do with Prometheus is that in late antiquity, some Romans started to associate Mithras with Prometheus. But Mithras is everywhere. I mean, Mithras, the cap of Mithras is on the official seal of the United States Senate.
This is the Phrygian cap, right?
Yeah, the Phrygian cap. The Statue of Liberty. Take a good look at the Statue of Liberty. That's not a woman. That is
no,
a man
it is
in
not
drag.
a woman for sure.
That is a depiction of the second degree of the Mithraic rites, which was called nymphs, meaning the brides of Venus.
Oh
so
goodness.
These initiates would dress up as women, and this is a Christian podcast, so I won't go into the rest of it. But this is still going on. There's actually a fairly powerful fraternity in New York called Beta Kappa Phi. Phi Beta Kappa in reverse, and it's all these guys on Wall Street and corporate giants and stuff, and it's the same. It's very Mithraic, and all the initiates have to dress in drag. People like Mike Bloomberg are part of it, but Mike Bloomberg moved a Mithraic temple into his London headquarters.
He what?
Right? Yeah.
He moved a Mithraic temple.
Yes.
into his headquarters at his office.
The headquarters, Bloomberg headquarters in London. The basement is a Mithraic temple.
Bloomberg News.
Well, Bloomberg International. I mean, it's a whole consortium, but Mithras is, people talk a lot about Lucifer, and it's funny because I start to get very annoyed because people start to throw these terms around. But Lucifer, to them, is Mithras, because Lucifer was the god of light. He brought, literally brings the light in the form of the fennel seeds that contain the fire and so on and so forth. So it just, seeing this stuff every day in buildings where the average rents per month were $10,000 and up and so on and so forth, I just started to realize that we're just living in a different world. And it's kind of like, if you're familiar with the science fiction author Philip K. Dick, he said the empire never ended. And if you really want to see that in person, just go into Midtown New York and you'll just see it. You'll just see it for yourself. And it's not abstraction. It's not like you have to get out your little decoder ring or your slide rule or whatever. It's all right there. It's all in your face. And people walk by it every day and they don't even realize it. So that was a big part of Our Gods with Spandex, which was also how theosophy played a huge role in this. That theosophy was, not only sort of the birth of the New Age movement, but all the stuff, Star Wars, Star Trek, The Matrix, Dune. I mean, all these science fiction things that we're familiar with, they all can be traced back to, in some form or another, to theosophy. And so I was sort of researching that, and it just goes on and on and on from there. And you start to realize that the masks change, but beneath the surface, things don't change. And, the issue is that a lot of people have this sort of adolescent attitude, oh, well, hey man, it's freedom and, the church's oppression and all this kind of stuff. And it's well, yeah, there are a lot of oppressive churches, and there are periods in time where the church has been, highly oppressive, but nothing compared to ancient Rome. Nothing compared to the pagan world, which is just you are nothing. You were just. I mean, in Rome itself, I mean, at least a third of the population were just slaves that had no rights whatsoever. And, you were just completely disposable, even if you weren't a slave, even if you were a citizen. I mean, people just, and it's very interesting because I had always been aware of this, but the full appreciation of this was reading a book by Elaine Pagels called Adam and Eve and the Serpent. And she really goes into how the early church was, I hate to use this term, but it was really a social justice movement, because the ancient Roman world was just so incredibly unjust. Mm-hmm. And you had all this hereditary privilege and so on, and just immense poverty, immense hoarding of resources, and so on and so forth. So the Christian church, people really overlooked this, was really a liberation movement, and
in its own way, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it was very much about like taking care of the poor, feeding the poor, setting up hospitals, medicine and so on, caring for the sick, caring for the elderly, because the Roman mind was just like, sink or swim, social Darwinism, which, is still very much with us in the same strata, let's just say, where it's just like they're trying to recreate a world where most of the labor is done by non-citizens, i.e. slaves. So the long and short of this, I'm sorry for just going on and on, but the long and short of this is just like things just don't change at their core. The externals change, but they just don't change. And interestingly enough, I mean, I would say that the one real change in history was the Christian movement and the rise of the Christian movement. Because for all the injustices of, like, say, of the Christian Roman era, it was night and day compared to the pagan Roman era.
That's right.
So the rise of Christianity in the West has no parallel. And it really was a game-changing moment. And I think that people sort of take that for granted. I mean, I think the problem is that it's like you become victims of your own success. And something that J.A.R. Tolkien said, he said that, you can create a perfect and just world and people will become bored with it. And that is a human weakness that is just a fact of life, is boredom. People just become bored with the good. Unfortunately. So anyhow.
No, I mean, that's the, by the way, there's a ton there, and I want to take that all apart because that was fantastic. That really set the stage brilliantly. But I want to pull on the Tolkien thread a bit, because I remember that line in The Matrix where Agent Smith is saying to Morpheus, like, the first Matrix was a perfect world, right? But your primitive programming or whatever kept rejecting it. And I've thought about this a lot. Like, okay, let's take the Christian nationalist vision, not that I want to get into the subject, and let's run it out. Let's go back to a really conservative, traditional, even patriarchal kind of world. There's still this impulse that would be within humans to like tear it down. Like, it won't just be utopia. Like there's always going to be something within us, I think, that's going to generate this amount of, like, even if it's perfect, like look at Solomon in his story. You read the Old Testament and you see the prosperity that follows his entire reign. There's so much gold, they don't even know what to do with it. And then he goes and he messes it all up, and his son definitely messes it all up. And that just seems to be the cycles of things, that maybe you're going to have some brief windows of time where you can establish peace and prosperity, but entropy will take hold, if only within ourselves. And what you frame with the Christian story is, yes, I think that there has been a period of time where Christianity was in the ascendancy and a relative amount of peace and prosperity was achieved. But what you're also saying when you said the empire never ended, that there's a counter force to Christianity that is real, that's coordinated, that's conscious, that's all around us all the time, in our movies and our TV shows, in our public parks, that is working at crossways with Christianity. Is that what I hear you say? Yeah, exactly. Well, no pun intended. Yeah, no pun intended at all. But yeah, it's great.
It's human fallibility. Now, what it boils down to is, I always try to boil it down to the basic psychology, and it's ego and narcissism, because there are certain people, who don't, if they don't have everything, they feel like they have nothing. Okay. they need to, they need to, it's, I don't know what it is. Is it spiritual? Is it psychological? I mean, what, does it even matter, the difference, or is there even really a difference, right?
Yeah, I deal with that question all the time.
Right. So it's just a question of like, people, need to be the top dog. People need to feel like they're at the top of the heap. And like I said, if somebody else has something, they feel threatened by that. Now, we live in a world of tremendous abundance, creation, right? I mean, it is filled with abundance. There is enough for everyone. There's enough land, there's enough water, there's enough food for everyone on the planet. Okay. But the problem is that all of a sudden it just gets to be like, well, if everybody else is got a little bit, I feel threatened by that because, I need to have it all, which I think, I mean, I can't really think of a biblical parallel for that. But to me, it always sort of boils down to, Christ in the wilderness, all these kingdoms shall be yours, right? And it's just, that is the temptation. That's the temptation of Satan. And Satan, to me, and this is, again, another thing that I think about, like, I said that Lucifer is actually, to the people who we call Luciferians, Lucifer is Mithras, okay? And this also brings in the metric system. So I don't want to get into that too much.
Wait a minute. I'm not letting that one go. This one I have to hear. Lucifer, Mithras, and the metric system.
Well, Mithra, Mithras.
Oh, no.
But it sounds crazy, right? But like, so metric, Mithraic, but so this is just like a little joke I was telling myself for years. And then I went, well, let me go back and look at the symbolism, because the symbolism always tells you the story. And then you look at the official seal of, the group or the convention or the body that created and instituted the metric system. And there's Mithras and drag with the Phrygian cap, plain as day, right there, front and center. So, Mithras and the drag part is really important too. And I think that really plays into a lot of the stuff that we're seeing in society these days. It is a religion. People need to realize that. And I don't think they do. People just think, oh, it's just some weird perversion or some weird, I don't know. People are just need for novelty or something. It's not. It's a very, very ancient religion that is in the Bible all over the place. That what they call the Kedeshim. Okay, the Kedeshim, and actually Paul had a word for them as well. What is it? Arsenikoi. I think that's the word in Greek.
Well,
but also,
it's homosexual. That's the word for homosexual. Right?
That's an incorrect or not incorrect translation, but it's an incomplete translation. It's cross-dressing temple prostitutes that we see throughout the ancient world. We see, Asherah, Astaroth, Ishtar, Atargatis. I mean, it's all the same goddess. It's all the same figure. I mean, all these different names, so it would go to Syria, it would go to, Lebanon, it would go to North Africa, whatever, and it would pick up these different names, but it's all basically the same figure. And it's a goddess that is associated with, well, they say love, but it's really lust, okay? Lust and war. But also, and it's funny because people get really mad at me when I say this, and it's just like, read your history. Never mind the Bible. Just go back and read your history. It's all right there. People just are so incurious these days because everything is about the tribe. Everything is about tribalism. Everything is about. Go ahead.
But say more about tribe, just to unpack the idea.
Well, the idea is that with the fall of Christendom, let's just say,
okay,
and the fall of the idea of the nation state, where now it's imperial. Empires are always incubators for tribalism, because you've got a bunch of people shoved together who have nothing in common, who are all competing for the same jobs, same resources, and so on. So it really boils down to, who is like me? Who's going to watch my back? Well, the people who are going to watch my back are the people who are most like me. And this is what, when you read in the Bible, the whole idea of the ecclesia, the people who come out of the nations and form this new I don't want to say tribe, but the church, the body of Christ, they come out of, and this is what why Paul preached to the Gentiles, right? Because Paul was a genius, just an absolute genius, right? And he understood, but he was also living. He also came from Tarsus, which was a hub of Mithraism, which is interesting. But he also understood the psychology of the empire because he had to. He lived within it, and he was. He also was he a Pharisee or Sadducee? I forget.
He was a Pharisee and a Roman citizen.
Okay, exactly. So, so he had a deep understanding of these things, and like I said, since Paul was a reformer, a social reformer, he understood that in this world in which he lived in, where everybody was just shoved together, and it was just this mess, this roiling cauldron of people and beliefs and attitudes and customs and so on, he understood that there needed to be something to bind people together, but it needed to be something new. Okay, it needed to be something new, and this is where the idea of the ecclesia comes in. And there's a lot of controversy among scholars that this isn't what Christ taught and so on and so forth. But Paul's my guy. I just think he was just an amazing orator. And even when I was feeling like kind of hostile towards the church, and we can get into why that was, but I've always just had a tremendous appreciation for his genius, because we are still living in the vestiges of the world that Paul made, because Paul understood that things needed to be new. There needed to be a new covenant. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, there you go.
Well, so you had mentioned before we started talking that that you could keep up talking Bible with the best of them, and you're definitely right about that. So in that you grew up with a very religious background, and so I think that's coming out right now in a way that is helpful for me. I'm familiar with a lot of the symbolism, because before I came to Christ in 2020, I spent 20 years in the New Age, and I had gotten into Western occultism starting in, it must have been 2013. And so that was after years of like Eastern mysticism and then psychology, then I got into Western occultism and started studying all the symbols and looking around and seeing them everywhere. I was part of like a mystery school, and actually taking formal training. And so I know that there's reality behind everything that you're talking about. I know about Helena Blavatsky. I know about the Theosophical Society. I know about Crowley. And like people look at this, and I think the person who probably did the best job with it was and not in the best way, is Anton LaVey. Like he puts on this corny kind of like McDonald's costume, and everyone just associates this with like, oh, this is just cheesy. You know what I mean? Just it's an icon, but there's reality to all of this. People believe this stuff. They practice this stuff. It is their life. It is their faith, and it is all about power. And I studied it, and I can tell you that it's very, very real. And I find that Christians don't understand that. And when you try to let them know, they just like, that can't be true, right? But you've seen
it's the lack of the supernatural worldview.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about that too, and then maybe also your background in the church, also, if you want to get into that, and then we can start getting into some other fun topics that have come up.
Well, where do you want to start? I mean, should we start at the beginning?
Let's start at the beginning. Let's go all the way back.
Okay. Let's see. Not too like when I was an embryo, though, right? No.
No, back to Genesis 1.
Yeah, Genesis 1. Okay. No, so I had, I consider it a blessing and a privilege that I had fairly, not only serious, but also conservative in the good way, where it was like focused on the traditions and the teachings of the church, and not on hang gliding and rock bands and that kind of stuff.
Laser light show baptism.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the thing is that we had so it was a church called Parkway United Methodist Church in Milton, Massachusetts, and we had this preacher named Reverend Riley Shirley. And I think he was from Kentucky, maybe from Kentucky, but he was like, you talk about like the return of masculinity. I mean, forget it. This dude was like, he was a captain in the Army when he was 21, Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and then he got his PhD. But he was also like a good man, like a good, like a real, like, you know, a good man who doesn't feel the need to puff himself up, you know, like confident but not arrogant, you know. I just, you know, it's just amazing to me. But the problem is that it kind of spoils me too. I mean, one of my problems a lot in life is just being spoiled by like having these incredible experiences when I was young, and you know, having, you know, Pastor Shirley in my life, because my mother was the, you know, the church organist and the choir director. So like we got there at like 7 o'clock in the morning, and it would be like, you know, sitting around wait for Sunday school to start Sunday school. And then like, you know, church service would be like 2 hours, and then we'd have like fellowship, and then we'd go to my grandmother's house for dinner, and then we'd have youth fellowships, and that would be, so it was basically like all day kind of experience. But it was great. It was amazing. It was a beautiful church, very Gothic, traditional. We had this incredible, strong, capable, confident, super intelligent pastor. It was very much a family feeling, you know. It was fairly large church, but it wasn't so large like a mega church where you just feel like you're in a shopping mall or something. It was small enough to give you a sense of like everybody knew each other, and everybody kind of looked out for each other's kids and stuff. So it was great. It was, and then we had a basketball team, and then my uncle, you know, talk about masculine. My uncle was like the dude of all dudes. I mean, just like big, brawny, muscular guy. Started working on cars when he was in junior high school. You know, opened his own body shop when he was, you know, well, actually, no, he started doing body work in Boston, this big place called Neponset Lincoln Mercury, when he was 14. This guy's like banging out chassis and stuff when he's 14 years old. I mean, just like, you know, but also like very devout too. So it's like these incredible influences on me. Like I said, like it was great, but it also kind of spoiled me. But, you know, and we also like, so Sunday school, I mean, you learned the Bible. You didn't go and like color in pictures of Noah. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It was like, even from like a young age, it's like, I remember when I forget what grade I was in. I think I was in like 6th or 7th grade. But, you know, we would have debates, you know, like the Sunday school teacher would split us up into 2 groups, and we had to like, I don't know, focus on a particular passage of scripture or something. And we had to like debate it. Like we had to like defend it. Like, you know what I'm saying? It was really an amazing experience. And, but unfortunately, Pastor Shirley, got swept, you know, he got plucked out from our little haven, there's like some metropolitan church in Boston, you know, it was sort of like a proto, mega church. I guess he was too good, not too good. I mean, he was, you know, like I said, he was a humble man, but it's just like, he had a greater calling, let's just say. But, and then we got the typical milquetoast, you know, semi-agnostic, nothing minister. And like the church just died.
Yeah.
Just died. But here's another interesting thing talking about that. We were very closely associated with Eastern Nazarene College. Are you familiar with the Nazarenes?
No.
Okay, so Nazarene was actually a split off from the Methodist Church. Like much, you know, it was like they kind of felt like the Methodists were getting a little too cozy with the mainstream, and they, you know, so we were like much more sort of on that Nazarene kind of spectrum, like more. I don't want to say to the left or the right, but more orthodox, more conservative, and so on. And that's where our youth pastors came from, and they were all great. And then we had these, it's just like such a privilege, you know, it really was. It was so amazing. But like I said, at the end of the 70s, then it just dies. And you're all just sort of sitting around like going, well, what do we do now? You know what I mean? Like, what next? And I think this is a major problem, and I think it always has been a major problem for the church. And it kind of ties into what you were talking about before, our time in Eden, let's just say.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I became, I got involved in like the hardcore punk scene in Boston and so on. Became, I was always kind of semi-feral, latchkey kid. And church was like literally like the only structure I had in my life. For real.
Mm-hmm.
For real. It was like literally the only structure I had in my life. So when I had kids, and like shortly after my second son was born, I was like, well, I got to find a church. I got to raise these kids in church. And when we get into the synchronistic stuff, there's a very heavy synchronistic influence here. But I didn't realize how much the church had changed in those 20 years or whatever. How many years, like say, well, actually only 13 years. Decade plus, the church had just completely changed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I was checking out these churches. And then like a lot of the woke stuff started coming in like really early, like particularly like the Episcopal churches. I mean,
facepalm.
Serious facepalm. But so I forget who I was talking to about just recently. But so what had happened is that, so I really wanted to get into church, but I was really in a situation where like I'm working in New York in the arts where everybody is universally and inextricably hostile to the church, to Christ, to Christianity, to everything. So I'm kind of like between the devil and the deep blue sea, because I had absolutely no support system. But there was like a really good pastor at the local church here, just a saint of a man, Prince. And he was kind of holding down the fort, like trying to keep the church on a keel there. But nobody like I would go there and like nobody would say hello. Nobody would say, "Oh, you're new here. Where are you from?" Like just the normal things that you do in normal human society. And I remember I thought, well, maybe I'll volunteer. So I'd volunteer to help paint the basement and stuff. Nobody said anything to me. I might as well just been a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just so, I felt betrayed, because I was putting myself out there. I was like putting myself out on a limb for this. And aside from the pastor, who was great, like I said, I just very cold. Like it's like their spirits had gone cold. And they didn't understand, like, here's this young guy full of energy, got a young family, somebody who could really help grow this congregation. I mean, just, I don't want to sound, I'm saying this humbly and modestly, but somebody who was willing to put in the work to help grow this conference, to do what it took to help grow this congregation.
Yep.
And it's like nobody would even talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exaggerating. No one would. The only person who did talk to me besides the pastor was this woman who I was in discipleship class with. She was literally the only person in this entire congregation of, I don't know, 200 or 300 people, something like that, who would even say hello to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is that? What is that, Will? Like, what is that? It's a social club.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying? That's
I know
church.
I've had similar experiences.
And I unfortunately, that was like the best of the lot, for real. Because I tried a bunch of different churches, and it was even worse. So it put me into this real kind of crisis mode, because I'm thinking like, okay, so I'm going to be facing ostracism from my peers, at the same time that I'm getting zero support from the church. Zero. Like I said, aside from the pastor. So it's like, well, I didn't want to let go. So I started like reading like, Gnostic fanfic, which that's all it is. Gnostic Gospels are just fanfic.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It's just like, it's just fanfic. And, and then, I don't know, it just kind of, it kind of like put me into a little bit of a tailspin. But I'm sure I'm by no means alone, right? No means alone. And like, so there was like a pretty active, and still is, like a big Baptist church here, right? But like, so I checked that out, but it was just like, it was one of these things where like, just too many people. It's just too overwhelming. But it was also the kind of thing with like the video screens and the rock music and the, and it's like, I'm sort of like, well, that's fine for the secular world, but it's just like, this is supposed to be literally a sanctuary. I mean, that's why they call it a sanctuary, because this is where you're supposed to go, come out of the world and, study the gospel and sort of shield yourself from all those outside influences for a little while. And my problem, I don't want to put down any of these churches or whatever, but I just felt like that was not, they were there to entertain people. And, maybe it's better that they're entertained. Well, certainly better to be entertained in that context than in the secular context, right? But, so that kind of, but I don't know, like sometimes I feel like, I don't want to say the wandering Jew, but just sort of like, I'm in exile. Like that was my mission, to be put in exile. I mean, maybe that's what it is. I don't know. I'm not going to try to guess the mind of God, but it was, but I did a lot of studying. I mean, even, because I got into like the Gnostic stuff, and I was just like, this doesn't make any sense.
No, it really doesn't. It really doesn't.
So I was still doing a lot of study, and I was really, really interested in the early church. So I did a lot of study on the early church, like Origen and Clement and people like that, Tertullian and everything like that. I was really interested in like the early church fathers. John Chrysostom, people like that. I was really interested. I was really interested in like, how did this movement? So this is like well after I sort of felt like I'd just been rejected. That's what it felt. That's exactly what I'm just realizing this now. I felt rejected. And how many people today is the church losing? Because people just won't take the time to just go up and say hello to somebody, say hello to a stranger who comes into their congregation.
Right.
You with me?
1,000%. Yeah.
So, but there was one other thing that, and this is sort of like the 800-pound gorilla in the room, is that, so my solution is that I around the same time, so this is like mid 1993 or so, I got online, and I was like, I got on AOL, and I was like, oh my, it's like, because they're like, oh, there's all these like Christian message groups or message boards and chat rooms and all this stuff, and it's like, this will be my new church, right? And I went in there, and it was just like nothing but anger and vitriol and hatred, and like, no, you're a heretic. No, you're a heretic. And like, here's 50 Bible verses that say that, if you're, well, let's just say, I don't know, if you're a Pentecostal, instead of a Baptist, you're actually doing Satan's work or whatever. And I was just like, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my eyes, because I had no experience with this stuff, because like I said, we had a pastor who kind of like really was a strong man who shielded us from this. This chaos that was starting to build up in the 70s, right? And I was just absolutely horrified. Well, absolutely horrified. I cannot begin to tell. Like my stomach muscles are kind of like my abdomen is starting to like tense up right now, just by the memory of this. Like just how, and again, it's that sense of betrayal. Do you understand what I'm saying? So here's the thing. So it's like no support in my daily life. Total hostility to the church, complete indifference from the physical church, and then the online church. And online, of course, is the operative word here, because it encourages the worst behavior in people. Just an absolute bedlam. And it's funny, because I saved a lot of those old like message boards and stuff, because that stuff is all flushed down the digital toilet now, all that old AOL stuff. And it's just like, I was looking at this stuff a few months ago, and I was just like, oh, that's what happened. Just rage and unchristlike behavior to the extreme.
Mm-hmm.
You with me?
Yeah, I get all of this.
So, unfortunately, all of these things that we're discussing, those three mortal blows that I suffered,
Mm-hmm.
Are really all part and parcel endemic to postmodern America.
Yes.
Okay. And then, but so later on, I discovered people like, you probably don't know any of these names because this is like back in the early 2000s, like this guy named Visigoth, who I became friendly with, a Christian conspiracy podcaster. And then Derek and Sharon Gilbert, who later went to work for Tom Horn and so on. And, but I just kind of felt like, even though I just was always pulled like a magnet, like, I'm like this little iron filing being pulled towards the magnet of Christ, right? Mm-hmm. But you're being blocked. There are all these obstacles in your way. And I would say that if anybody truly cares about the church and truly cares about Christ and the future of the church, these problems need to be addressed. They need to be addressed. They have to be, because there are so many people that the church is losing. I mean, and like these online bubbles and like the ortho bros and whatever, Bible bros and everything like that. It's just like they live in these little tiny bubbles and they just don't understand how tiny these bubbles are and how hostile and inhospitable the world outside is. Like you were saying, that there are all these forces arrayed against them that they hold all the cards well, all of them. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. At least in the temporal sphere,
right?
As far as temporal power, influence, money, you name it. Mm-hmm. The forces hostile to the church control the deck. Mm-hmm. And, I just see this whole process happening again. I see it. And I'm not kidding. Well, my throat starts to close up, with just the anxiety of this. It's just like, people, Christians is, or nominal Christians or whatever. I don't want to say what's in people's hearts, but people who claim to be Christian, forget about the whole be a light unto the nations. Mm-hmm. Be an exemplar. Mm-hmm. See, and that's the whole thing with both Christ and Paul. It's like set the example. Walk the talk. Mm-hmm. You with me? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like walk the talk.
Live it.
And it's like, all throughout this, there's a theology professor who has a bunch of talks on YouTube, going through all the Gospels and so on. And he really goes into like the history and like, what is the context of this? What is the social conditions in which these books were written? How did people live? How did people think? What did these words actually mean? So on and so forth. Because that's another problem, is that people think that you can sit down with the Bible and translate it into vernacular English without any of the historical context of how these people thought, how they lived, how they used these words. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to just keep babbling on, but it's you can tell I'm passionate about it. So,
yeah.
But it's like, I really do have to say, because it's like, and it's very personal to me, because it's like I had really, really messed up childhood. Mm-hmm. And like I said, the church and my grandmother who lived to be over 100 and was just very devout. And like I said, walk the talk. I wanted that back in my life, and I just didn't realize how much the world had changed. Mm-hmm. And then it's sort of like, well, why has the world changed? Mm-hmm. And that's sort of, maybe that's the secret impetus behind my work. Who is pulling the strings, and what are they saying, and what are they doing to make us, fall away?
Mm-hmm. How did we get here? How did I get here?
How do we get here?
Well,
Go ahead. You do all the talking now.
No. I mean, like the question is not the question of how did we get here that a lot of people are asking is also the question, how did I get here? Because I think we all recognize that we are responding and reacting to certain historical, social, economic conditions that are on the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so we're processing the world around us with the framework and information that we have, the relationships we have, whatever these conditions are. It's like, okay, how do I make the best possible decision? I think that's a lot of people are trying to do. They're not great at it. And then they do that throughout a lifetime, maybe without necessarily a concrete plan, because it was basically our generation where the traditional path was all but demolished, or certainly after us, like we're both Generation X, right? So like the millennials, they didn't get that. So we had the last vestiges of the old world. Like I sent you that video that my buddy Sean sent me about like what life was like before smartphones. And you just talked about how you got on the internet in 1993. I got on around the same time. I think it was 91, 92 when I got a modem. 2400 baud modem, like,
yes.
yeah, you get a 9600 baud modem and it's like, oh man, this is really fast. You know what I mean?
Rocket ship. Yeah.
Yeah. And so someone's got a 14.4. Whoa. So I remember all this. I remember BBSs. I remember America Online. I remember all that. And it was a different world, and that world was demolished, right? And it's been demolished in our lifetimes, and we have had to respond to it. The baby boomer generation has not had to respond too much. Their trajectory was already set. When things first started, the controlled demolition began in 2001, right? They had already had a number of decades, and they were in cruise control by that point. We can talk about that too. But the rest of us have had to figure out, well, okay, how did I get here? How did we get here? What's going on? And put the pieces together in the ways that we know how. And I believe a lot of people are doing that. I don't know. I don't know how else we can answer the question, because it can't be entirely because of our own incompetence or our own blindness or our own ignorance. I really don't believe that. Of course, we're all sinners and we all have our blind spots, right? And we all have our flaws. That is true. But there are too many good-hearted, good-intentioned, you know what I mean? Like, they mean well, or at least they're trying to do the best they can, that have found themselves caught up in the blender of, the past 15 years. It's like, well, how did society become a blender? When did we go from living in a society to living in a blender? And so we take these things apart with our own interests and perspectives.
Well, a lot of it is, like I said, the empire.
Yeah.
So there'd always been this push and pull between America as an empire and America as a nation. And I think after 9/11, there was, this was pretty much explicit. No, we are an empire now. We're going to behave like an empire. Mm-hmm. And, empires do certain things. Empires don't like unified populaces. They don't like strong men. Strong men are a threat to the empire. They do whatever they can to weaken men, strong men.
There you go.
They don't like people to be healthy and happy, because healthy and happy people don't buy junk.
That's right.
Okay. And, I guess the only difference between the pre-9/11 world and the post-9/11 world is that all these sort of things that maybe more fringe, and mostly on the left, ironically enough, people on the left were kind of like pointing out that, consumerism, materialism, American empire, violence, and so on and so forth, they came to be embraced. It's like, this is what we're doing now. We're doing empire now.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a direct quote from somebody. We're doing empire now. And the problem is that technology, I've always said that, like, the stronger our tools become, the weaker our bodies become. And the stronger our computers become, our thinking machines become, the weaker our minds become. Because we become dependent on this. And this is no more clear or apparent than in the elites, because the elites have been, all the early adopters, right? They've been living on all this stuff their entire lives now. And nobody, it really does remind, there's that whole meme, like, are you thinking about Rome every day? It's like, I think about Rome all the time, man. I have for like decades. Mm-hmm. Okay. And a lot, but interestingly enough, I mean, my interest in ancient Rome came out of my interest in the early church. Mm-hmm. It really was, because I wanted to understand like why these church fathers thought the way that they did, why they saw the world as they did, why they saw, metaphysical ideas of good and evil as they did. There were all very compelling reasons for that. These people were not fanatics. That's the other thing too, is like, oh, they were all just like fanatics. Like, no, they weren't. These were guys, these were philosophers. These were very intelligent men who really relied on reason as the top, tool in their kit bag. It was all about reasoning. Come, let us reason together, right? Mm-hmm. So I do think about Rome a lot, because, but this is really where I started to see that everything is cyclical. And I think it's human nature. Nature is cyclical, or more accurate, I like to use the term creation now. Mm-hmm. For some esoteric reasons, but I do prefer the term creation of it. Like, nature as part of creation is cyclical, and I think that the ideas, and again, I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm going to offend somebody, but the ideas of dispensationalism, where it's just this straight line going in this linear fashion, that's men's idea, because we are born, we live, and we die. I don't think that's God's idea. I think that God, it's the seasons, for everything there's a season. What is that? Ecclesiastes, right? So I think that in order to really understand where we are, we have to be very clear-minded about, like you said, how we got there. And it's like the first chapter of The Endless American Midnight is where we are and how we got here. Mm-hmm. Because I was talking about, a lot of that book is like me talking about the New Atheist movement. Remember mm-hmm. that? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And all of a sudden, Richard Dawkins is like, no, I'm a cultural Christian. Oh, really? Yeah, are we now? Yeah. Are we now, Richard?
Convenient.
Oh, yeah, a little buyer's remorse, huh, buddy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But, and then even after I wrote that book, I did some more digging, and I was like, oh, who was funding this, guys? Oh, it was the Jeffrey Epstein network. Oh,
what are the odds? Oh, no way.
What are the odds? Who is paying for all these people? Who is paying for all these symposia and all these meetings and all these big parties and all these things where these people were being basically read their marching orders? Oh, it was Jeffrey Epstein and his buddies, all his little friends there. And interestingly enough, a lot of it, as nefarious as it sounds, and it should sound so, a lot of it was it was delusion, because there was this guy named John Brockman who had this whole idea of like the third culture, and mm-hmm. that we would build a culture now on science and technology. Mm. Okay. And you really see that starting in the early 90s with the whole explosion of the internet and computers and so on. And then, the World Wide Web and all these kind of things. Mm-hmm. So this was all deliberate. And then you just start to realize that things are not, things like of this nature are not organic. Things happen like that because people make them happen like that. And they make them happen like that because they have ulterior motives for those things to happen like that. And so we do have this Epstein layer and this whole, singularity and transhumanism. It's just all this utter nonsense, just absolute anti-scientific ridiculousness. We also have these cults, mm-hmm. who I would argue are at the top of the heap. Like I said, Mike Bloomberg with his Mithraic temple. Why does he have who does that? Mm-hmm. Why would you do that? Because not only does he have a Mithraic temple in the basement, it's historical, by the way, but he had it moved from its original location into his building. Why would you do that? You know what I'm saying? And mm-hmm. this, to me, this is the Luciferianism. Mm-hmm. This, what people call Luciferianism. It is, if you really want to nail it down, what it actually is, it's Mithraic, and it all has to do with salvation through technology. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's also about escaping the bonds of time. And that's what Mithras rising above the zodiac, that's what that symbolizes, is escaping, the way they saw the archons, which were actually the planet. You hear that term from Gnosticism, but it really originally meant the planets, because there was this whole idea through astrology that the planets, were manifestations of the gods and they controlled our destinies and so on. And here's another interesting thing, because, if you've ever been around the conspiracy sphere, you'll hear a lot about the stuff about Saturn.
Yep.
Okay. Now, again, I just would read this stuff and I'm just like, what are they talking about? Because really what Saturn was to the ancients, and what people don't realize, is that it was the outermost planet. They didn't know about Uranus or Neptune or Pluto. I still count Pluto as a planet, but because I'm old. They didn't know about Saturn. Was it? Saturn was the outermost. So if you got past Saturn, your soul was free and you could travel the cosmos, because that's how they viewed, their afterlife, or their desired afterlife, is not to go to the underworld, Hades, Styx, Sheol, whatever, Tartarus, but to escape past Saturn, get past Saturn, the taskmaster, the timekeeper, and your soul was free to travel among the stars. And you're probably familiar with this whole line of thinking with the work that Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval did in the 90s with the Great Pyramids, the shafts being aligned with Orion and Sirius and so on. But this was pretty much universal. And, even the Gnostics believe this. It's like your soul needs to escape the planets and so on so it can travel amongst the stars. So there are, very powerful impulses behind this, and it's old, and a lot of it's tied up in drugs, particularly hallucinogenic drugs. I mean, the Mithraic religions, if you read the Mithraic liturgy, it's the whole thing starts off with a recipe for making hallucinogenic drugs, and then you're like literally abducted by flying saucer. You got to read that thing, because it's just like
What are you talking? What is the Mithraic initiation rites or something like that?
The Mithraic liturgy, it was found in the Paris Codex, right? What they call the PGM, and you read it, and it's freaky. It's freaky because it all starts off with mixing the herbs and spices and so on. And I'm sure the Greek translations for that were all about the specific things that you're using. But then you're drawn up into the air and this beam of light, and there's this ship that's a disc and it's got doors. It's UFO abduction.
Oh my goodness.
2,000 years ago, brother. 2,000 years ago.
I looked up, by the way, the Mithraeum is a thing in London. It's it's presented as a museum. This isn't so the UN has a meditation room with a giant hunk of iron, you know what I mean? And this kind of weird staircase. It's a place for all religions to meet. That I've looked into that. And so but you had to go digging to kind of find the meditation room at the UN. So I went looking for the London, Bloomberg Mithras Temple. It's a whole museum. It's a whole big thing. They're celebrating it in your face.
Yeah. One of my patrons was when we went to London, he went down there and he took pictures of it for me.
Oh my goodness.
And it's freaky. But there's another element I want to bring in here. And this is a lot of your listeners, I'm sure they already think I'm just this heathen black backslider, and so on. I'm just going to have to live with that. What I think a lot of listeners will say is they will see their own story reflected in you. I have encountered many people, men and women like you, who have talked about the church long before I came along, and how churches have abandoned, betrayed, treated their children, the generations terribly. So I think don't feel that way, because I've talked to a lot of people that share similar versions of that story. But please continue. I appreciate that very much. But there's another element that needs to be brought into this, and this is something that you probably see me talk a lot, and a lot of people go what are you talking about? But that's the Watchers, because I think that's see, the Watchers is something that arose in sort of the post-Old Testament, pre-New Testament period. And it's recounted in the Book of First Enoch. And actually, there are sort of references throughout the New Testament to the Book of First Enoch, right? Mm-hmm. And this was an apocryphal Jewish apocalyptic text.
Yep.
Okay. And you have to be kind of careful with a lot of these terms because there wasn't like a universal, it wasn't like the Vatican.
Right.
There was the temple in Jerusalem, but there was just, you had like all these different sects and so on. I mean, even within the, you had the Sadducees, Pharisees, so on and so forth. But anyhow, the watcher angels. So this is based on Genesis 6:4, the sons of God and the daughters of men and so on and so forth. Now, the writers of Enoch just went to town with that. And it was the whole thing, like this host of angels. I think there was 100, and they descend on Mount Hermon in Lebanon, and each one of the rulers of the host, I think there were like 13 or something, they taught men weapons and writing and meteorology and all these technologies basically. But the problem is, since this was being written in the context of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which was just like the most depraved and bloody and violent empire that we've probably seen, the writers of Enoch were saying, that the gifts of the watcher angels, not only brought about the rise of the Nephilim, which I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with, the giants, right? But also just constant warfare. That what men did with these technologies that they got from the watcher angels was just engage in incessant warfare. So, but. So you talked about the UN meditation room. Okay. So you probably know the involvement of Alice Bailey and the Lucis Trust. I'm sure you came across them in your pre-Christian days, right?
No, I came across them afterwards. But yeah, Alice Bailey, Andy Besant. Yeah, I know about all of them.
Well, Alice Bailey is a little bit different. So she splits off. So what you have in the early 20th century is that the Theosophists are very involved in like Hindu nationalism and so on. And then they find this boy named Krishnamurti, who they say is the Lord Maitreya is the Christ child and so on and so forth. And that sort of like, that thing just sort of like falls on its face. Yeah. So in the wake of that, he resigned. He quit. He's like, I'm not going to be the world savior. Right? Yes. Good for him. But so Alice Bailey starts the Lucifer's publishing company, and again, that's Mithras. But I actually went back, and it's probably because I'm just deeply masochistic or something. But I actually read her writings because it's, all the stuff with like Space Brothers and fifth dimensional ascension, like all the stuff that you see in the New Age, that all comes from that period, right? And but what she does, so she puts all that nonsense in there with like just all this proto New Age pseudoscience and so on. But she's talking about the Watchers, and she's saying the Watchers were the good guys, and that the Bible and the Book of Enoch got it wrong, that they were sent by God. That they fell, that they sacrificed themselves to fall to earth to bring, this consciousness to mankind and this technology to mankind. So they were actually the good guys, and they're coming back. Okay. So there's what they call, I forget I think she calls it like the first watcher, which would be Lucifer, aka Mithras, whatever. But I just started, and it came to me in a very roundabout way that we don't have time to talk about, but it suddenly made sense to me that watcher worship was really the unifying theme that united all these different factions of the Western ruling elites. Whoa. Which sounds kind of extreme and so on, but because there's a certain genius to it, because in the Bible says, that the Nephilim were the men of renown, the heroes of old, right? So what that does is that folds in all the ancient pantheons. So within the context of the watcher angels, you can say, well, these, it's basically like Lucifer times 100, right? The whole extra biblical story of Lucifer, which comes more from Milton, but the whole idea of, Lucifer falling from heaven and so on and so forth. It's like I said, it's that times 100, but it's like you can tie in sort of your, you know, Judaism themes, Christian themes, pagan themes, esoteric, occult themes, all these sort of different themes, and it all can come under this umbrella of the Watchers. And Alice Bailey spells it out, okay? Mm-hmm. And believe me, I don't know who actually ever read those books because it's, like I said, it's torture to read them, but she was never lacking for money and is still not lacking for money today. And actually the headquarters of the Lucis Trust is 120 Wall Street. If you look at that building, it's a recreation of Entemenaki, which was the Tower of Babel.
What? Wait.
Yeah.
So what, Lucis Trust headquarters is what I should search for?
Yeah. I mean, I've tweeted about all this stuff over the years, but
I know.
So yeah, 120 Wall Street. So there is a certain genius behind this. But the British royals, I believe, are totally on board with this. I think the royal families in general.
Oh yeah.
But like I said, it's this great umbrella because you can, unite Jewish occultists, Christian occultists, yes, pagan occultists all together. It's like all the different flavors of the ruling elites can all follow, they can all sort of find common cause under this big tent of Watcher worship. Now, I've been talking about this for a while, and I also talked about this in the context of 9/11, which is going to get me into trouble, so I won't talk about that here.
Let's get in trouble. I'm going to try and share my screen and see if I can do this. I've never done this before. Here we go. 120 Wall Street. Share. Can you see that?
There it is.
There it is.
Classic ziggurat.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, sorry for those of you who are just listening. You'll just have to go to YouTube and watch this. That's wild. Okay, yeah, because you can kind of see a little bit of the spiral. Like if someone just told me, like, look at the building, I wouldn't immediately call that Tower of Babel. But now looking at it, I absolutely see it.
Well, it's actually based on a ziggurat. And yes, actually, interestingly enough, the headquarters of British intelligence is also based on a ziggurat.
Wait a minute. Isn't this where they filmed the scene from Ghostbusters? No, that can't be that building. That would be way too obvious.
I don't know. That would be way too obvious. Yeah.
That'd be way too obvious. Okay, yeah. But I mean that this rooftop area, like, that's, I don't know, like, I'm not into this, but that seems like a good place to sacrifice some people.
Yeah. But all those NGOs, all those globalist organizations are all in that building.
Right.
Right. All the big, but that's the other idea too, is that globalism is really tied up with Watcher worship as well. And it's this whole idea of like oneness. We're all one. Yes. Everything is oneness. You know this from the New Age.
I know all of this. I spent so much time taking this apart. One book I got to give a shout out is Game of Gods by Carl Teichrieb. This is a huge doorstop length book where it's like he goes into all of this transhumanism and everything. It's an incredible book. He's going to come on the show soon. But anyway, please continue.
Oh, where was I? So yes,
you're talking about 9/11 and we were going to get canceled.
Oh, well, see, but so your viewers will see the constellations here, and this, the vault of heaven is described in the Book of Genesis, but the stars were really what helped me decode a lot of these things. Okay, I mean, understanding the stars and how they were just so central to the world, the entire ancient world, because this is how they told the time. This is how they knew what year it was, and so on and so forth. Was very important to me in cracking a lot of these mysteries. And with 9/11, so like I said, I had this experience of being on the ground. I mean, I wasn't in town that day. I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be in town that day working in Lower Manhattan on Lafayette Street. And I had the day off. And I just talk about, because I would have been in that World Trade Center path station. But actually, a very close friend of mine and his family, his wife and his two daughters were actually on the ground. And, I'll tell you this story. Your fans, listeners, viewers will love this. So they were taking their kids to nursery school, and they would cut through World Trade Center Plaza. And then the first tower came down, and you saw all the dust and stuff, and they got separated. Mm-hmm. And somebody, like, nobody could see anything. It was like opaque. Somebody came out of nowhere and grabbed his wife, my friend's wife, and his daughter, and lifted them up and the stroller and carried them away from World Trade Center Tower. She never saw who it was.
Oh, wow.
I mean, maybe understandably, but, I love that story because it's just like miracles do happen. But anyway, gosh, it's something. I had done a big live stream on this. I'd done a live stream on a couple different podcasts on this. But you really have to understand the constellations, because at the center of Watcher worship, is as much as I understand it, and I got a lot of this through decoding Freemasonry. So Freemasonic symbolism, which everybody's kind of puzzled over for years, is all stellar. It's all stellar symbolism. And so I would be taking the path station back home every day. And when the towers came down, when the World Trade Center towers came down, and I was still going in and out of New York for work and so on, I noticed that the rooftops of the World Financial Center basically encoded the glyph for Sirius, the star Sirius, into their design. And there's also a stair, so this is the first degree Masonic tracing board is the stairway to Sirius, the blazing star, what they call the blazing star, they call the blue star, and so on. They have a bunch of different names for it. But Sirius, and the stairway to Sirius is Orion's belt. It's following the 3 stairs of Orion's belt to Sirius, okay? Mm-hmm. They taught you this when you were a kid in school, how to find the star Sirius in the sky. And that was, in the wake of 9/11, so this would have been maybe early 2002, late 2001. And that's when I really started to notice it. I'm like, oh, man. And then I realized, oh, wait. Twin Towers, Gemini, Boaz and Jachin, Freemasonry. Well, why would you bring them down? Well, if you understand Watcher worship, the Watchers were banned basically from heaven. They came down and they mated with the daughters of men, and they were banned. They couldn't get back into heaven because what stopped them? The gate. Well, there was actually 2 gates, one on each side of the sky, because you have the 2 seraphim on one side, and then you have Boaz and Jachin, the Twin Towers. So you bring them to Twin Towers so you can get back up into heaven. And what is heaven? You're following the Milky Way to the north. Okay, and at the north you see Cepheus, the Garden of Eden, and Draco, the dragon, the serpent.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, there's this whole understanding, and I'm basing this on the symbolism, but also on reading the works of Alice Bailey, that not only will the fallen angels, let's just call them the fallen angels, it's more familiar to people, will the fallen angels be released from Tartarus, the abyss, but they will ascend back into heaven, depose Michael, and the archangels, who they see as usurpers, and Alice Bailey talks about this explicitly, and regain control of heaven. And that's, if you follow, I'll just hedge this a bit. If you just follow the symbolism and the sequence of events and the symbolism, you'll see that. Because now here's another thing that I benefited from being on the ground, is that a block away from the World Trade Center was Chambers Street Station, okay, subway station. And there are all these eyes all over the place, just eyes. It's the creepiest damn thing you've ever seen. And then there's this big eye in the middle of it, in the big eye of the globe. That's the Watchers. And whenever you see this stuff all the time, that's
the one eye sign.
That's the Watchers. It's all the Watchers. And I didn't understand this until I found the key to this with Alice Bailey. So it's like, why do all these big corporations, why does the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation keep this weird little cult alive? That's just filled with like little old ladies with, knitting needles.
Which cult?
the Lucis Trust.
Oh, they're the Bill and Melinda Gates are keeping the Lucis Trust alive?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Why does that not surprise me?
Because why would it?
Right.
Why would it?
Yeah.
So the Watcher worship, I just really understood that this was at the basis of everything. And like I said, because it's like almost like a unified field principle.
Mm-hmm.
Unified field principle where all the different weird sects of the occult elite could coalesce and, under this big tent.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, just read two books, Initiation, Human and Solar, and Externalization of the Hierarchy.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
It's all spelled out explicitly.
Yep. Externalization of the Hierarchy is your big book, right?
Not my big book.
No, her big book, not yours. No. Her, Alice by Alice Bailey. Yeah. Well, she had all of her books dictated to her by Jawal Khul, this ascended master from Tibet. Like she didn't say that she wrote all the stuff. She was channeling them from this spirit.
That was her British intelligence handler.
Oh, was it really?
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah. It's all British intelligence. And like I said, just go look up GCHQ headquarters that they call Babylon on Thames.
Okay.
And you'll just, it's everything. See, here's the thing, Will. It's all out in the open.
It is.
It's all like it's all hiding in plain sight, and people just don't see it because.
Oh my goodness! Are you kidding me?
Put it on screen.
Oh my god! Okay, let me pull. Oh, let me pull it up. Oh, this can't be. Okay, let me do the screen share again, and then let's see. You have got to be kidding me. You've got.
Oh no, that's the flying saucer. That's a different one. Look up Babylon on Thames is that's the flying saucer. Okay. So that's the other part of it because, like I said, the flying saucer in
Babylon on Thames. So, are you what? What is happening? I'm sorry for those of you who are listening. I'll link all this in the show notes, but like, my word. Okay, wait. Let's see. Let me just do this. Okay. What? What? All right, let's see. And I think it's this one. Okay. That.
There it is.
Oh my goodness. It's just so odd. Like if I were just cruising by on a boat looking at that, I wouldn't think anything of it. I mean, it's kind of awkward looking, but then you point out Babylon on Thames, like, yeah, that's exactly what that is. That is exactly what that is.
Well, see, but so getting back to the point I was making about empire. See, empire is the only, all the work and struggle and fighting that you have to do to empire is only good if you become gods. And why were the Christians persecuted in Rome? One reason, because they would not declare that the empire was God. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like I said, Caesar. I went back and I was reading about the church fathers and stuff. That was the entire basis of it, is that they would not acknowledge the empire as God, or the emperor as God. Caesar, whomever, whatever. Mm-hmm. And that was why they were called atheists. They were declared to be atheists because God on earth. So that's the whole idea behind empire, is you shall become as gods. And this goes back all the way to ancient Sumer and Babylon with, the God, and talk about the whole thing with the Nephilim. The ancient Sumerian kings were called Lugals. Mm-hmm. And Lugals means giants. Same word as Nephilim, giants. Giants in the Bible, okay? It's the same exact principle. Some believe that they were giants. I mean, we don't have to get into the whole thing with giants and so on, but that can kind of get a little weird, but
yeah, people get real into that.
Yeah, I used to be into all that alternative history and so on and so forth, and I just I kind of snapped out of it. One of the reasons I snapped out of a lot of that stuff, there were a couple reasons. One I can't really go into, but also we had like a UFO show up over our house back in 2017. Classic Chevron UFO. And we watched it for like 20 minutes. We got photographs of it and everything like that.
Like the Phoenix Lights.
Go ahead, sorry. Yeah, exactly. And I came away just feeling like that's not a good thing.
No, you don't want it.
That's no.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, I wasn't processing anything. It was just pure gut instinct. Like, I don't like that. Why is it there? What's it doing? That's not good. Mm-hmm. For all I know, it could have been military. I mean, McGuire Air Force Base is about an hour here, flight time or whatever. I mean, I don't know. But it didn't look aerodynamic to me at all. Mm-hmm. And I was really into ufology. And it just, like that. Over. Yeah. Like in a flash. I was just like, those things aren't good.
Yeah.
There's a whole thing, like demons and so on. And I'll entertain all theories and so on. I don't think they're extraterrestrial. I don't think they're from other star systems or whatever. But I don't think they're good.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And it took me, like, it really took for, close encounter of the first kind, to really like snap me out of it. So I don't know. But we haven't talked about synchromysticism at all, which is okay because we kind of have,
Yeah, we have. I mean, that's I think a lot of really important context has been given for the listeners to understand that this is coordinated. There are people that genuinely believe it. It's not a LARP. This is their religion. And they're wealthy and they're powerful and they're, we'll say, ancient. They're more than old, they're ancient. It's going back thousands of years, millennia, went underground. It burst back onto the scene, for many different reasons in the 17 and 1800s, which I've documented before. And now it is the religious context that we all live in. Like that's the thing. We don't live in a Christian nation anymore, right?
No,
we live in empire. We live in occupied territory. And I wanted to speak to your experience at the church. Like, of course you're going to be rejected from the church. You're going to come in, you're outspoken, you have a young family, you're clearly leading, right? And you're a capable man. Churches do not want capable men anymore because capable men tend to step on toes and point out problems and want to fix problems. And a lot of people like problems right where they're at. And so that's that. And that is still true today. It's rare to find a church where an obviously capable man can walk in and be welcomed in. Please come sit down. Who are you? Tell us about yourself. That's a real church. You experienced a social club, like you called it, a Christian social club. And that is most churches. And it's very important for me to know how far back it went, because one of the projects that I've been, working on is understanding, as we talked about, how did we get here? How did the church get here? Right? I had a podcast with a man named Jeff Wright. He spoke about a month ago. I'm coming to understand some of the stuff about like the young, restless, and reformed and purity culture. But you can roll it back to Billy Graham. What got left out? How did the degeneration occur to the point where it's like people laugh at the Christian church, and now the Christian church is back embedded in the Roman Empire? There it is. We're back in the middle of the Roman Empire. So that's what we're talking about.
Well, I'll tell you what played a huge part of it was scientism.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So what really, we had the wars of religion in, the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, so on and so forth. And then you had the Enlightenment, which is just like, okay, we need to establish sort of a common parameter on a secular basis where we can run our governments and so on and so forth, where we're not going to just get caught up in this again, these religious wars. And then following on the Enlightenment, you had this, the Industrial Revolution. And we had this huge explosion of science and technology, particularly throughout the 19th century. Mm-hmm. Now, concurrent with that was the this movement, particularly in Germany, where you had liberal Protestant theologians just basically deconstructing the faith.
Mm-hmm. Yes, liberalism, I mean? Yeah.
So, and, just basically, miracles are out, virgin birth is out, resurrection is out, up and down the line. Everything was just, and it just became like this kind of like Unitarian kind of deal where it's just fine, it's ethics and fine thoughts, and fine feelings. And in response to that was the fundamentalist movement.
Yep.
And but the problem with the fundamentalist movement is that's really started to rise to prominence at the same time communism rose into prominence in Europe. So all these like big corporations said, well, we can use the fundamentalists as a bulwark against communism. Okay. I mean, later they switched their attention to the fascists and the Nazis and so on. So you had people just believed that science was going to save us. Science was going to solve all our problems, all the long-standing problems of humanity and the human condition were eventually going to be solved through science. They didn't anticipate that science was actually going to bring science and technology were going to bring a whole host of new problems that are much more intractable than the old ones in some ways, right? And so it just became this sort of back and forth, but it was really religion subordinate to the secular sphere, okay? But the thing is that I keep pointing this out. I've been pointing this out for 10 years now, and it's like people, I think, are finally starting to get the message that we are in what's called the Great Stagnation. Now, the Great Stagnation is where all the low-hanging fruit of science and technology have been plucked, and there's no new frontiers to explore.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, it's worse than that, because since there's so much money and so much power invested in this scientific project, that we have what's also called the reproducibility crisis, where
hacking.
All these scientific studies, I read like at least 10,000 last year were just thrown out. 10,000. I mean, that's just astonishing.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, when you bring this up to like nerds and secularists and so on, they think, well, they said the same thing 100 years ago. Yeah, well, they said the same thing 100 years ago before you had thousands of people working in millions of people working in thousands of labs and billions or if not trillions of dollars being spent on science. It's like it's been done. Okay, we've reached the end of the line. We're at the end of the line with science and technology, and I think. I mean, I've been saying this for a long time, but I think a lot of things that we kind of conditioned not only by Hollywood, but also, ironically enough, I see this all the time through conspiracy people. Oh, you don't understand. They've got, hidden UFOs and all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, where'd you get that idea? If you really break it down, they got it from Hollywood. And Hollywood is beholden to the military industrial complex. Okay. But we're really at the end. So there's a lot of problems that are going to arise from this because so much of our prosperity over the past 100 years was driven by science and technology. And now it's going to start to contract. Okay. But we're going to see, like, did we talk about this live or before? The second religiosity that Oswald Spengler talked about.
We talked about it before.
Okay. So you have this period of religiosity followed by this, I think he said a century of, deep religious skepticism, atheism, agnosticism, and so on. And at the end of that period, you have the second religiosity or the second religious revival. And it's almost like a return. I think the term you use, like the springtime of a civilization's development. Okay. So it's already happening. People don't understand that, like, the new atheist movement is dead. It's done. The skeptic movement, which is sort of like an ancillary of the new atheist movement, that's been dead for almost 10 years now. That fell apart. These movements all fall apart. But what's replaced them is witchcraft, occultism.
Yep.
New Age.
Yep.
Essentially chaos. That's what's replaced scientism, is just chaos. Okay. But also this religious movement that people think is the transgender movement, which is deeply religious, deeply ancient, well attested, well recorded, well known. It's just that we all have to pretend that it's not a religious movement. Even though if you go on Twitter and you see people with all the trans flags in their bios, oh, we are sacred beings. They use that term. We are sacred beings.
Oh my goodness.
Right? Well, what is the definition of sacred beings? Kadashim. It's in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament. Right? The temple prostitutes.
My gosh.
And so at the same time, the same people who are pushing this whole thing, with the trans movement, trying to get all these kids to transition, they're also saying, hey, sex work is real work. Do you see where this is all leading?
Yeah.
Do you see where this is all leading? And it's all religious. But everything, having the benefit of this Eden, like I said, this Eden that I had, this refuge, this sanctuary as a child that just so spoiled me for the first 13 years of my life. It really got me to understand the psychology of religion, and that religion doesn't need to be spiritual or theological. You have scientism is a religion. It's got dogma, it's got holy texts, it's got saints and sinners. It is straight up religion. Okay. Now the people who really, first exploited this were the communists. Right? The sacred texts, Communist Manifesto, Little Red Book, whatever, the saints, Mao, Lenin, Engels, Marx, whomever, right? And like this whole cosmology that we're going to lead this paradise on earth. A lot of people say this is Gnostic, and it's just like, oh, come on, man. That's, Gnostics were just hippies who wrote fanfic. That's not Gnostic.
Right.
It's pagan. It's pagan. It's a pagan cult. Communism is a pagan cult, and it has a salvational mythos, doesn't it? It has a salvational mythos.
Yes, it does.
So we don't understand that with the fall of Christendom, which I think was temporarily displaced by scientism, starting in the 19th century, and really, the final triumph of scientism took place in maybe the 20s or so on, certainly the 30s, right? We're at the end of that period. And now we're in this, it's like ancient Alexandria, right? Where it's just like all these sects and gurus and teachers and movements and so on. It's just absolute bedlam in some ways. But that is also going to change. Now, here's the point that I want to make, because you think, oh, well, just sit back and let it happen. Well, there's a big problem. The same people who are so invested in the scientism, salvational paganism, are now equally invested in this fallen angel worship, the salvational mythos of the fallen angels rising from Tartarus and bringing us to paradise and utopia, at least for them. And it's taken me a lot. Like I said, people are starting to wake up to this. People are starting to realize this. But I would say, 99.9% of the world is still oblivious to it.
Yes.
And that, I think, is the danger. Because it's like Jung said, you can only replace religion with religion, right? Well,
he should know.
Yeah, right. They want to replace this fading scientism, this whole better living through chemistry and all that kind of stuff, with this watcher worship, because it all, not only does it fold in all, you can just throw everything into this tent, but you can also throw in science, because the watcher worship, the watcher angels, the fallen angels, brought all this technology to mankind. But this is also the thing with Mithras, is that Mithras is actually a disguise. It's a disguise for the ancient hero demigod Perseus. Okay, and if you read the myths about Perseus, the gods brought him technology, the helmet, the sandals, the sword, the shield. It was all Olympian technology, and it's the same exact principle. It just takes it, but they can all fold it in. And like I said, just read the Alice Bailey stuff. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be like, what is this man ranting about? This is all insanity. It's all spelled out in black and white in those books. So there you go.
No, you're absolutely right. I don't think that if they think you're ranting, then they would probably think that I'm ranting too if I started talking about the things that I know. But I can validate. I have not read that Alice Bailey book, but I did an extensive amount of research, weeks worth of research for a presentation I did a year ago called "Exiting the New Age." It ended up being around 2.5 hours long, as I sort of set out to prove that the New Age is its own form of religion. And so I just started pulling on the strings that I knew, and I just kept pulling and kept pulling and pulling, and it's like the whole thing just started unraveling, and I discovered many of the same things that you've been talking about. And so all these things are very, very real, and they all stand directly in opposition to the Christian faith. It is demon worship, it is false religion. And the thing that I'm struck with is that Christianity emerged. Well, it didn't emerge out of the Roman Empire. I mean, I guess in a way it really did. It emerged out of the Roman Empire in that era. And so then you had all this history where you had a Christian West and a Christian America. And it seems like under Christians' noses over the past 50 or 60 years, the Roman Empire has sort of sprung up again around us. You know, we're living in Rome. People are talking about the fall of Rome everywhere. It's like, yeah, you know why Rome is going to fall around us? Because we're living in Rome. Because we stopped living in a Christian. We're talking about the pre-Constantine Rome, and that's what I hear you describing. Is so watcher worship. I've seen you post about this. By the way, my buddy Tim is listening to this. Shout out Tim. He's probably loving all of this stuff because he talks about watcher worship as well. And so when you say what you've talked about watcher worship on your Twitter account. And there was a thing last year, and maybe it's still happening because we're getting into concert season, where there were all these big LED screens behind all the pop stars with all these big, like android robots with wings and stuff like that. And
It's still happening.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because you talked about when you were talking. It's like, what is watcher worship? I had a sense of the word watcher in the image. So let's talk about that. Because it seems like you're not worshiping, you're linking them to worship of of fallen angels. Is that essentially what that is?
Well, it's right there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, everything is hiding in plain sight. When you look at all these big displays, right? They all have like angel wings. They're all these like weird cyber demons with angel wings. They're the watchers. I don't know who's behind this. I don't know if this is, a spiritual influence, or this is deliberate and intentional, or it's just through osmosis. I'm not exactly sure, but it's all there. It's all there in all these like giant statues that we're seeing everywhere.
Yep.
I mean, the whole big thing last year, that weird demon that they put on the roof of the New York courthouse, right? With
that one,
the braids like ram's horns. Well, what was that thing called? It was called Witness. Witness, watcher.
No, it wasn't.
It was. It's you would be stunned by how obvious and how open it all is.
Okay, so I'm gonna pulled up another one. We'll do a screen share so people can see what I'm talking about. Again, sorry listeners. Okay, so this, right? So you've got Yeah, so you've got, like, you can see the people with the phones down here, and you've got, I guess it's the DJ. And then, but like this, there's been a lot of these videos going around of these a lot of them. It was like a whole thing last year. Giant towering, CGI figures that are pretty demonic when you look at them. Like, these are not friendly.
No, they're explicitly demonic. I mean, they're demonic. You don't have to qualify it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, just blacked out eyes and kind of a weird thing going on. And I remember these videos were going around a lot last year, and some people were like, "Wow, cool." And I'm like, "There's even the ones that were pleasing to look at were very troubling thematically, I guess."
They horrify me. A lot of them look like nightmares that I had when I was a kid, to be honest with you.
Sure. Yeah.
Or another thing that I didn't really talk about is, I used to get very sick, and I used to have really bad fevers, like extremely high fevers, like 105, 106 all the time.
Oh, wow.
And you're a dad, right?
I'm not. No.
Oh, okay. Well, if you got kids, I mean, we used to take my kids to the hospital when they had 102, 103. It's frightening. But I would have these hallucinations, very real hallucinations, but a lot of them look like those those figures, and I can't help but wonder, like, is this some sort of demonic torment? One thing that a lot of my, especially my older fans, not older, but people who've been following me for a long time, as I talked about this leprechaun that kind of just manifested in my living room, and it was absolutely horrifying. But when I see a lot of those animations, it really does remind me of that, and it kind of makes me wonder. It kind of makes me wonder if, like, they obviously do look demonic, but a lot of the movements and the morphing and stuff was something that I used to experience a lot because of these really terrible fevers, which I later found out triggers the DMT production in your brain, in the pineal gland. So, all that rave stuff just horrifies me, to be honest with you.
It does now.
What?
It's quite scary now.
Because back in the 90s, it used to be like happy faces and rainbows and stuff, and now it's all demonic. But the other thing too, another thing that I wrote a few posts on was that that Travis Scott. That whole thing. Now. But that was all watchers, man. It's like, it was like watchers coming out of the mountains. I mean, the T-shirts were literally that, like coming through these portals. Once you crack that code, you just start to see it everywhere, and it's like, it really is like they live.
Oh yeah, here's another.
You know what I mean?
Here's another image from that Travis Scott concert. I'll put that up on the screen. I gotta get one of like Joe Rogan's guys. Like, there you go, where he's like this tunnel coming. It's just so scary.
But that's Mount Hermon. Those are the rings. You see that in a lot of medieval artwork. The rings, like the rings of hell. Yeah, just coming. Yeah. And he came out of that. Yeah, and he's done a lot of. I always get confused. It's not Minecraft. It's the other one. Fortnite. He did a video where it's like explicitly watchers, and it's got this like weird giant eye UFO behind him, and he's depicting himself as a giant and so on and so forth. You just can't believe how blatant and obvious this stuff is.
Yeah.
And it's like, people, what about when you were a kid and it was like Alice Cooper and Kiss and stuff? It's like, that stuff was just vaudeville.
Comparatively, I mean? Yeah. Oh, here's the Fortnite concert. Let me pull that up real quick. I want everyone to see this, so like we know that you're not making this stuff up, right? Like what's going on here?
Yeah.
another giant.
Oh yeah.
Bowing down to a giant. 12 million people, the headline said, watched this Fortnite concert.
Well, another thing that people should look up, and I blogged about this as soon as I saw this, I was absolutely horrified. Actually it's on the Washington Mall now, and it's this giant, hideous demon, and it's the ugliest thing you've ever seen. It's called "We Come in Peace," and it was this art installation that is this giant, hideous demon, right? Like a hermaphroditic demon with like 3 faces. And part of, so it was the demon. It was also like this giant robed figure bowing down from it. Now, this was on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum of Art when they had that weird, crazy Met Gala where it was all like mocking Catholicism and Christianity and stuff.
What the?
You got that on screen now?
Yeah. Hold on.
Put it up.
Oh my goodness. Okay. This is just. There's nothing good about any of this.
No, it's all bad. Horrifying.
Okay. So whatever is going on here, you've got the thing bowing down to whatever this is.
Oh, it's got faces in the back too. Yeah, so it's got faces all around it.
Oh my goodness. And they got the bowing down. What the? And it's got like what is that? Do I want to know what that is? Huma Baba, Poughkeepsie-based artist. Okay, so there's the front of it. Yeah, this isn't troubling. This is exactly what should be, this is exactly what should be in the National Mall. What? What is happening? Help. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. How disturbing is that?
There's a lot of stuff just like this, man. A lot of it. I've been trying to document it as best I can.
It's like a
But people are
rat.
just like, but here's the interesting thing. So you had a lot of what I would call agent provocateurs, and the one we can all agree on is Westboro Baptist, right?
Sure.
Like just total agent provocateur operation. But I think there are
Yes.
others who are more subtle. But you know, the bad reputation that Christianity has in the culture now isn't just because of the failures of the church. It's been through intentional manipulation by these people who have what they want to be the next religion,
Yes.
the next global religion, which is basically demon worship.
So I want to show you something actually. So I looked up the artist Huma Baba, right? So you see this mask? There's down the street from where I live. There's an art gallery with like a coffee shop next to it. The photo of this mask is in the window of that art gallery. I walk past it. I don't go to that coffee shop anymore, specifically so I don't have to look at this mask. So this is oh my goodness. Okay. Sorry. I just wanted to share that. Like, this is the woman who designed, I'm sure all of her stuff looks, very, very humanistic, very, the kind of thing that you would want to show your kids. It does not look like that at all. Yes, very, very loving of the human race. This is not the product of a disturbed mind at all, surely. So
it's
yeah.
On a secular level, it's psychotic.
Yes.
It's very typical of the kind of artwork that psychotics produce.
Yes.
You know what
Yes.
I mean? So
you were talking about You were talking about agent provocateurs. You think that there have been other ones?
Yeah, well, but the whole program, let's just say, has been to get people to, when they're faced with all this outright demonism in their face, and if somebody wakes up and recognizes it, all their peers will say, "Oh, what are you, one of those Christians? What are you, fundamentalist, intolerant, bigoted, against free expression, all this kind of." I mean, you've heard it all before.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, I mean, you don't have to be a Christian to be offended by this stuff. You just have to have basic human morals, because it's all hideous, and it's outwardly hideous, and it's just become more and more ubiquitous. And listen, so we're in the midst of what I call MK Ultra 3.0. Okay.
Oh.
All these, when people go to these big festivals, are they just sitting there just boogieing and shimmying, maybe have a couple beers or something? No, they're all taking heavy psychedelics. They're all taking ketamine and I don't even know what else.
LSD, acid still
LSD,
around,
mushrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what's popular in the club scene these days, but they're all taking like heavy duty, purified hallucinogens, and they look up on this, they hear this music, which is just, I mean, it's all it's doing is just playing on the base reptilian mind, boom da boom da boom da boom da boom da, repetitive, the same riff over and over again for half an hour or something or longer. And then they look up, and what do they see? They see these morphing techno demons. If you put this in like a Left Behind movie back in the 90s, people would think like, "Oh, you just push it a little too far now."
Yeah, dial it back, guys. Come on, no one's going to believe that.
Yeah, this is not credible. I mean, so much of the stuff that's going on. You probably saw on Twitter today this whole thing about the furries. In the high school. Now, I knew about the furries 30 years ago, being in the whole comics world, and it's not like they've gotten worse. I mean, the whole thing started as, came out of porn, right? Came out of this comic from the 80s called Omaha the Cat Dancer, and just sort of went down from there. But the whole thing is like the furries are like, even in the weird, dodgy, morally debased environment of comics fandom, even they're like just too much, I said on Twitter today, it's like anybody who buys a furry costume, it should come with an ankle monitor. I mean, that's how bad it is. And like, I've heard stories, I won't recount them here. I heard stories about furry conventions that would just make you like literally throw up. and just absolutely revolting. And it's like, and now it's like in Utah of all places, right? It's like, oh yeah, this is acceptable. What is happening? Like, what have we become? And we're not even Rome. I mean, this is just pure Babylon now. It's it's like we aspire to Rome. I mean, even in the worst days of the Republic, we aspire to this level of degeneracy, and like literal so that's a loaded term, but it literally means to just fall apart.
Yeah, that's how I mean it.
So there you go.
No, I mean it's important. It's important to acknowledge this stuff, especially because you were talking about scientism. And so the story that I've been reading about how do we get to postmodernism, that modernism and scientism and materialism wanted to do away with religion. We will build our own, right? And so then you had then postmodernism is a distrust of all authority. It's essentially relativism, right? So modernism said we will elevate science and technology. That's how you get technocracy. And now you have postmodernism, which is we don't even trust the authority of science. There is no authority. It's all relative. Well, what does that lead to? That leads to this universal mystical longing, right, to understand the mysteries, right, divorced off totally from cold steel bare science. It's like this split in the psyche, and so that's kind of what you see, right? And that mysticism, that's what transhumanism is merging these two things kind of back together, transcendence through technology. So like modernism shattered. I mean, World War I, to be fair, World War I was a globally, we'll call it traumatic event. Like I don't think humanity was ready for industrialized slaughter on a scale unimaginable in human history. Like that was really,
and it was so stupid too. The whole thing was just ridiculous. I mean, the whole way it came about was just, I mean, I think it's ultimately spiritual.
Oh yeah. I mean, like, and World War II came along to finish the job. Like whatever was left of our poor traumatized, Western psyche was finished off, setting the stage for the degeneration of the 1950s. And that's where you have Kinsey, and that's where you have Elvis. And it's been this long, slow process of just kind of ripping apart the psyche of men. And sort of now here we are. And so now we find ourselves explicitly in occupied territory that grew up all around us. Like we were colonized. I say we, I mean Christians, or I mean decent civilized Christian society has been colonized essentially by a pre-Roman civilization. Have you ever looked up into like esoteric fascism? Have you seen that?
Oh yeah.
Okay, yeah. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't pick up on is a lot of this talk of Greece and Rome and Egypt and these great civilizations. It's essentially what they're trying to say without really saying it. Is they want to harken back to a pre-Christian civilization, right? That's their explicit goal as a form of rejection of Christ. And now this is the context that Christians find themselves in with infiltrators in the Westboro Baptist Church. Megan Basham has a book coming out called Shepherds for Sale that documents how many pastors in America totally sold out, to globalism.
Prosperity gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very much so. And then maybe you saw the whole thing with like the sword swallower on stage with that men's conference. Yeah.
What was that, man? I watched that and I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah. That's where we're at.
What was the context for that? I don't know, man. I got to tell you something. I mean, even like I don't even know what brand he is now, but Kenneth Copeland.
Oh yeah.
And Benny Hinn and Joel Osteen and everything. It's just, I have a friend who, very devout Christian, but he's sort of like kind of into that whole Messianic Judaism kind of vibe. But he said, I was talking about him like this is back a long time ago. And I said, well, what do you think of this whole prosperity gospel thing? And he said, prosperity gospel is from the deepest pits of hell. He said, it makes God into a genie. And I just thought that was so pithy and succinct. It was so perfect, and it's so true. But listen, I mean, it's for a lot of people, I mean, you've got to understand that prosperity gospel is huge throughout the world. Particularly in the developing or third world or global south, whatever it's called now, because prosperity is very alluring to people who aren't prosperous. So, these are very interesting times. I I don't know. You know, I meant to ask you. So you had this whole experience with like New Age and occultism and esotericism and stuff. I mean, what did you grow up in?
I grew up liberal, atheist, Jewish.
Oh, okay.
I mean, like we went to the high holiday services, and I was bar mitzvahed, and we did Passover and all this different stuff. So I guess you would say I grew up religiously Jewish, but there was never any like theological grounding. Like it was never like we sat around and talked about God or talked about like, what does this mean in our lives or anything like that. Like we do these things because this is what we do, but not, what supernatural reality is it pointing to, let's say.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because I told you my mother was the organist at my church. She was also, on Fridays, she would play the organ at Temple Beth David in Canton, Massachusetts. So I would get dragged there sometimes. I'd actually sat in a bunch of seders and stuff, like Passover seders and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then on Saturdays, I'd go to Mass with my Catholic friends. And then on Sundays, from from dawn until dusk, or dusk until dawn, I don't know. Yeah. The dawn until dusk. Yeah. I mean, all day, when I used to call them Methodist marathons. So I was just immersed in it. I was swimming in it. My entire life. But like I said, it was the only structure that I had because, my childhood was Gen X, latchkey kid.
Yep.
Total chaos, I was basically semi-feral in some ways. And then falling into the hardcore scene in Boston and that whole scene. Mm-hmm. So, I really wish that I could have found a place to raise my kids in the church.
Yeah,
I really do. Mm-hmm. I really regret that. I because even if they turned away from it, they would have that grounding, right? That I had. And we are an empire now. We have no culture. We have no shared culture, because our shared culture used to be the Bible. Mm-hmm. Everybody, that was like everybody. Jews, Protestants, Catholics could all sort of understand that language, mm-hmm. understand that context. That is gone. Mm-hmm. That is gone. And if it's going to be rebuilt, it's going to come from strange places. I just want people to understand that. Mm-hmm. It's not going to come. You can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Yeah. It's going to come from people on the fringes, on the margins. The way it did in Jesus's time, the way it did with Christ and the apostles. They were seen as extraordinarily marginal, weren't mm-hmm. they? They were seen as troublemakers and outsiders and everything like that. So, if that's to me, but that's how it will come again. Mm-hmm. But in the interim, like I said, the ruling classes of the world have their own religion that they are methodically introducing to the world. Methodically. Mm-hmm. And those images that you showed from those raves and stuff, anybody who has any context, never mind if you're religious or whatever, but has any context for just mind control should be horrified by that. Mm-hmm. It is, because it is mind control.
Yeah.
Straight up, the music, those graphics, and then the drugs. These people are being completely mind controlled, and they don't even realize it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you want to talk a little bit about? And by the way, I agree. I look at those videos, and you see the flashing lights, and everyone in the audience is intoxicated on something, either legal or otherwise. Giant, massive LED screens, right? Pounding music, and everyone's focused looking at. It's usually a DJ show, and the DJ's standing in place, so the attention is oriented towards, very well lit, so you can spot him, and then you have this big display going on in the background, guiding everyone's attention. And what is it? Michael Hoffman talks about twilight language, about this subtle language that we're being indoctrinated with through all these world events, that is driven by this, we'll call them occult or Mithraic or whatever proper term, elite that really believes this stuff, that are using the levers of power to slowly, break and reshape people's minds in the form of something that is more consensual to their desires. This is happening.
It is happening. And, it's funny, something that I pointed out, getting back to MK Ultra and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I have an origin story for MK Ultra that I think a lot of people have found compelling. And that's during the war when Jung and Alan Dulles would get together for lunch every day because Jung was treating Alan Dulles' mistress. And this was in Switzerland. And this was not too far from Sandoz, where LSD was first created around the same time. But so MK, I believe, since this is, Jung is obviously sort of, at least at the very least, peripheral to this. I think MK stands for Mithras Kybele. And Kybele is, in the ancient world, the wives of Mithraeus would worship Kybele, alternately called Cybele, Romanized as Cybele, but in the original is Kybele. So MK, Mithras Kybele. Because, like I said, Jung at that time was obsessed with the Mithraic liturgy, which is just a drug trip, UFO abduction. It all fits together. And that's why you saw a lot of UFO imagery being introduced during the whole countercultural era. As a matter of fact, the real...
Roswell?
Well, Roswell was a little early, but in the late 60s, where all the psychedelic bands came out in England, the place was called the UFO Club.
What?
And we saw, big bands in the 70s, ELO, their whole thing was the giant UFO, and the band Boston, Earth, Wind and Fire, Journey. I mean, so like UFOs are all being incorporated into all this imagery as well.
Here's a poster of Pink. I can't read it, but this is apparently what Wikipedia says. Pink Floyd at the UFO Club in London. I guess it says
CIA UFO.
Oh my! Is that what that says?
Yes.
Oh my gosh! Flying Castle. That's what that says.
Oh man!
I want me to send you this link.
I've seen that image before.
You've seen it.
I've seen it. Yeah,
Okay.
I probably have it saved on my hard drive. But
and by the way, I just want to share. I did find this letter from Carl Jung to Alan Dulles. He wrote him a letter in 1945. This is on Carl Jung psychologysite.blog in C.G. Jung letters. This is 1945. To Alan W. Dulles, my dear Dulles. That's okay. Since after my illness, I get interested once more in the affairs of the world, the various ways of propaganda begin to interest me. German propaganda tries inevitably to hollow out a moral whole with the hope of an eventual collapse. A better propaganda appeals to the moral strength and not to the feebleness of the enemy. As far as the psychological effectiveness of Allied propaganda is concerned, it strikes me that the best things that have appeared so far are General Eisenhower's proclamations to the German people.
Yeah, I mean, Jung was an agent. He had a number. Like, it wasn't 007. Yeah, was it 488?
So yeah, Reddit says, "Oh my, what? This is a Guardian article? No." Carl Jung, a troubled relationship with... I'll do it later. Well, oh my gosh. Where does it say this? This is on The Guardian. I'm just going to scroll through it real quick. Apparently, let me see if I can find 488 in the... Oh my gosh. It has also come... Here, I'll share this with the screen as well. I'm learning a whole ton. This is great, by the way. Okay. It has also come to light that Jung operated as a spy for the OSS, the predecessor to the CIA. He was called Agent 488, and his handler, Alan Dulles, remarked, nobody will probably ever know how much Professor Jung contributed to the Allied cause during the war.
Well, I would say more after the war. I really do believe, since I know I was really into Jung for a while, and I read a lot of his works and a lot of information about him. I know how he was really attracted to this Mithraic stuff. I mean, I think the Mithraic stuff predates Jung. I think it started bubbling up in the mid 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he gave it sort of a context. Jung was crazy though.
Yeah.
Freud said Jung was Meshuggah, and I think that's probably pretty apt. But the thing with Jung, where I still find Jung useful, is the way he would organize a lot of this information.
Mm-hmm.
The way he would categorize it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a technology.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go along with whatever he was in, and it's almost impossible to say what he was in because he was kind of all over the place. But he did create, I think, a useful technology for organizing a lot of this information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For instance, introvert and extrovert come from Jung.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there was a lot of interesting, and so this has also been this thing, like Freud was like this hard-bitten scientific guy. Not true at all. Freud was as every bit as weird and mystical
Mm-hmm.
and occult oriented as Freud was. He just kept it under wraps.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe the problem was, because they were obviously very close for a number of years
until they fell out.
Yeah. But they were, just totally unethical. They would have sex with their patients, all of it. It's just, it was like the Wild West days back then. But, the whole idea of the talking cure has been discredited in some quarters because it's been replaced by pharmaceuticals. But I still think that there is, valid use for that form of therapy.
Yeah.
It all depends. A lot of these things really boil down to like who is controlling it, who's got their hand at the wheel, because people tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You talked about the New Age. I've talked about this for a long time. So the New Age had all this nonsense, like the pseudoscience stuff and the Space Brothers. Just a lot of really bad cosmologies. But they're also, the whole idea of taking better care of yourself, health, the health thing. Even the masculinity stuff, that was big with Robert Bly in the 90s, Iron John and that kind of thing, the whole thing.
All about
so
that.
there was a lot of, but I put these all in the forms of techniques and technologies because, like I said before, a lot of the belief systems come from Alice Bailey. And if you read her books, it's patently clear. And before her, Blavatsky, where it's just like everything is just thrown into a blender. Okay. But as I said, I think this was useful to the people running. I think that Blavatsky was being handled by Russian intelligence and that Bailey was being handled by British intelligence. But I don't, they were like cousins, wasn't the Romanovs cousins to the British royal family? All these royal families are intertwined, but I think they all had this idea of the Watchers. See, but here's the interesting thing too, is that they could, before it became known, before it became exposed, if they didn't wait so long, they could have introduced Watcher worship under the rubric of Christianity, and I think probably been a lot more successful, particularly with the degraded state that Christianity or Christendom had become, let's more accurately, in like the mid 20th century. I think they would have had, great success sort of just sneaking this under the door. You know what I mean? But maybe they found the New Age and neo-paganism and occultism and witchcraft and all these other things more useful because these things are just so chaotic and, there's no central organizing principle that people can get together to resist. That's the important thing. Divide et impera, divide and conquer. And that's, I think, behind a lot of the sectarianism that you see in the New Age. It's just constantly throwing up some new cockamamie kind of weird thing because people never coalesce. And I think that's the problem that they have with Christianity, but certainly the more traditional forms, Lutheranism, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and so on and so forth. You don't want people to coalesce, because coalition could become a venue for resistance to your program, and that's the main bugaboo in their book.
Yeah, I'm. There are a network of confessional Protestant churches as well that hold to, like, the Westminster Confession of Faith, London Baptist, and this Confession of Faith. These are hundreds of years old, and these standards are what keep faithful Protestant churches on the rails. But those have been thrown out. You mentioned the Liberalism Project. There's a great book I must mention every single podcast, Christianity and Liberalism by J. Gresham Machen. It was written 100 years ago, and he's basically talking about, it's almost like prophetic. You can read it and look back and say, wow, he's describing today churches that have thrown out doctrine, that have emphasized relationship over law, and just denatured the entire religion, specifically to break down the boundaries from, I don't know whether it was all that coordinated. It most likely was, but to make people softer to accept a lot of heretical ideas. And so you look at a lot of the laser light show churches, some of the stuff going on with Hillsong and Bethel, and some of the more extreme manifestations of charismatic churches. And you just see the New Age flooding in. Like, they didn't have to do watcher worship per se. They were able to demolish, the American evangelical church from the inside with the sexual revolution, probably. And so they saw that once you had all these young kind of boomers at the time really going apostate in the 1960s, leaving the church, like, oh, it'll be so much more easy to market to them because they've left the church in the dust. And then you see what happened to the boomers and what they did to the church as well. So, like, we don't have to do watcher worship, within the church. We'll do it for those who have left the church, because we've got these other tentacles into the church itself to bring it down from the inside. That's my theory.
Well, I would just counter that. I mean, I don't want to say that the impetus behind, the entertainment church, let's just call it, was entirely negative. I think there was a real concern that people were just going to leave altogether and just fall into chaos. Mm-hmm. And it was better to have people in the room at least getting a little taste of something rather than just being hostage to the culture.
Sure.
But, the interesting thing too is that, being my age and paying attention to these things from a very early age, I remember when the New Age first came out, and again, I thought, oh, well, this is my return to Eden. It took, it didn't take very long for me to realize that was not going to happen. I got wise to what a mess it was very, very quickly. But the thing that continues to blow my mind is just how successful the New Age movement was into basically, like you said, just basically taking over the evangelical churches, which in the 80s were completely diametrically opposed, but were just completely taken over. And again, I don't want to say that this is all some nefarious conspiracy or whatever. I mean, a lot of it was just like, we've got to survive. We've got to carry on. And, the problem with a lot of liturgical churches, it didn't speak to people anymore. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that this sort of return to that, particularly with the return to orthodoxy. I find the Greek Orthodox Church to be, incredibly beautiful, and beautiful liturgy, beautiful music. I mean, a lot of it, but it's just completely alien to me. Yeah, completely alien, completely foreign to me. It's like there is no toehold for me in that world, because it's just another world. It's
1,700 years old, or something like that. It's like it fossilized in the East, and Turkey, hundreds of years ago had rejected reform. We're gonna hold on to this. So it's literally otherworldly. It's from another world.
But that's the appeal. That's the appeal.
Yes, but
I understand that. I totally understand that, and I appreciate that. And if conditions had been different, I would have found that to be very appealing. But I think that I think there's a limit to that, and unfortunately, all the what I call the ortho bros are kind of going to be defeating them on purpose, because the leadership of the Orthodox Church are not happy about this at all.
The Orthobros.
They're not happy about the Orthobros.
No, they shouldn't be.
They're very unhappy with it. So they're, we're on the cusp of sort of a conflict there. I don't know how it's going to play out, but it's none of my business. See, but this is the other thing. Like when I was talking about all the sectarianism and just verbal violence that I encountered online that you can obviously still see to this day on Twitter all the time. I just had to say, I can't do this. This is not Christ-like at all, at all. I understand the sectarianism as, it's sectarianism in, the Book of Acts, the conflicts between, Peter and Paul, right? This is as old as the church, but it's just like, it wasn't like it is today. And I can't do it. I can't be part of it, And like I said, it breaks my heart because church was my Eden. It was the only place of sanity and structure in my young life. That was it. Everything else was total and complete chaos. It was only the church that gave me any kind of structure or sanity or security. And why would I not want to return to that? Right? Yeah. But it really is like in the book of Genesis, it really is like the two seraphim are blocking my way back. I mean, there's a lot more than two, Sure. It isn't just seraphim, right? But it's like, I really appreciate the whole poetry of that, you can't go back. You can't go back to Eden. You have to move through the wilderness and get to the other side. And again, most people are just going to say, well, who is this guy? Who cares about this guy? I'm just calling it like I see it. And it is very personal. It's very personal to me. It's extremely personal to me. But I just can't play into it. I can't do it. I can't spend my life fighting with other Christians online because all these Christians that are fighting with each other online should be turning their energies outward, not inward. And it always seems to me that this is, it's a sad symptom of the real decline of the power of Christendom, let's just say, that so much of this anger is turned inward. Again, not that it always hasn't been, like we talked about the wars of religion and so on. But at this point in time, at this point in the timeline, when the forces arrayed against the church are so powerful and so numerous and so militant and vengeful and nasty. There's a level of anger that I've never seen in my life. I'm going to be 58 years old this year. I've never seen the kind of vehemence against the church that exists today. Just the spite, this is circle the wagons time. This is not, circular firing squad time. This is circle the wagons time. And it's like, I saw this happening 30 years ago and I just threw up my hands because I was powerless to do anything about it. Powerless to do anything about it. And to be honest with you, I feel even more powerless. And even though I ended up traipsing through the wilderness, I kind of feel like, I'm on the other side of that now. But I very much feel powerless in the face of this. And it's a spiritual battle, and the only solution to the spiritual battle is spiritual. Period. That is the foundation of any resistance against this. And if people can't even, if it's just like nominal Christianity, tribalism, if they can't get past that, it's over forever. It's done. And the second religiosity is going to be this weird, it might have it might wear the skin suit of the church, but it's going to be this sick, evil, bizarre watcher worship, fallen angel nonsense. So there you go.
No, I think you're right. It's why I don't engage with theological debates online. I know a lot of people will. I take a lot of I get DMs and messages from Catholics and Ortho Bros, who just feel the need to, oh, Protestantism led to all these terrible, evil things. Like the world was just fine under the Roman Catholic Church or whatever. It's like, I don't know. You might want to look into the, if you think the Enlightenment, or the Reformation was the end of all things, like you might want to look into the Renaissance, right? The actual Renaissance. That's a whole other conversation, like, and understand what the role the church played and all that stuff. So, but I don't engage in these debates for that exact reason. It's like, on the, like, yes, we do need to be unified against this common enemy, which will broadly label paganism. Like Christianity is the answer in response to paganism. And yes, people do argue, quite forcefully, who's the one true church? You need to come home to the one true church. You're a heretic, all that. It's like, would you shut up? Right? Like I'll gladly talk about, doctrine all day, but I really think that there are more crucial threats that we're dealing with. And ultimately what I think it comes down to, maybe not necessarily, in the Catholic Protestant, kind of denomination, that kind of thing. But I think that there's a lot of arguments that goes on within the denominations themselves. And I think it's easier to argue with your friends than it is to actually go out there and confront an enemy. Right. And I think that there's yeah.
So, I mean, that should be like carved in stone.
Yeah. Yeah. And
that's
what I think the American evangelical church did for the past, I'll probably say 30 or 40 years, is they decided that they would withdraw from fighting the culture, and they would instead argue about the Trinity and soteriology. And I think the culture just said, okay, you guys can stay over there and generate all of your books about various Christian doctrines. That's fine. Just don't mess with what we've got going on over here. And the church is like, okay, cool. And so American culture degenerates as the church is focused inward on its navel. And now when you have actual Christians that are trying to speak out against the culture, they're fighting a rearguard action, right? We're fervently praying for national repentance. Well, how did it get here? How did it get here? It got here because the American evangelical church, consciously or unconsciously, probably a mix of both, took its eye off a cultural ball. And so now they find themselves living in Rome or Babylon. And the big argument is like, well, do we just enjoy the decline? Right? Or do we actually institute a Christian form of government? What's our relationship with power? It's like, what are you doing? Like, do you see what's going on? And it manifests in ways in this abortion debate around the election, which I don't want to get into. But it's just real question about, what does a denatured church do with a fallen culture? And what does it also do with confident, fit, capable Christian men who are biblically sound, scripturally aware, who aren't taking no for an answer? And that's the part, that's where I sort of find myself. It's like, hey guys, that's messed up. Are we going to do anything about it? No? Okay. I'll go somewhere else where the guys actually want to fight for something. Right. And there's a lot of that. Right. And that's sort of the moment that we're in. And so maybe there's a little bit of hope in there that there might be a church near you that has that fighting spirit, which I don't think your church that you grew up in would have characterized itself as having a fighting spirit. But today, the same thing would be considered as a fighting spirit.
Yeah, it's funny how the definitions have changed like that. But I think first and foremost, the arguments made against paganism, and I don't like that term. And
right
at the top is this, like I said, this weird occult, I don't know, demonology or something.
Yeah,
is just human misery. The human misery that has grown up in the wake of the collapse of the structures of an ordered civilization. So falling marriage rates, falling birth rates,
yeah,
skyrocketing suicide rates, skyrocketing obesity, skyrocketing drug abuse, skyrocketing alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, listen, I'm not a big fan of video games. I get in a lot of trouble, but men just sort of escaping into this whole, escape pod of video games and porn and,
Mm-hmm.
and drugs and everything like that. I mean, all these things create human misery. That, listen, I had a major problem that I still have this chronic pain situation. But starting about 20 years ago, these doctors just started pumping me full of all these drugs. And at first I felt better. And then I felt insanely worse, to the point that I spent more days than I can count begging God to kill me.
Oh,
I'm not even exaggerating. I mean, levels of pain that I didn't even think were possible.
oh man.
Yeah, it was, I mean, thank God I've been delivered from that. But I know all about how things that seem to make you feel better, I mean, even make you feel great at first, the long-term effects are annihilating. And again, I mean, as the thing that is even worse is not only just like what adults are experiencing on an epidemic level, but what we're doing to our children. Never mind, I mean, this whole religious program with, the transitioning and so on, all the pharmaceuticals that are being pumped with, all the sick, weird, what I call doctrines of demons that they're teaching in the schools, that are just making kids crazy and miserable and depressed. Everything is become anti-human and destructive and immiserating. And that has to be at the because people are going to say, well, I don't, your religion, I don't know, whatever. I don't, it's not for me or whatever. It's like, oh, you're bigoted and you're intolerant and all this other kind of nonsense. It's just like, it always seems to me that the things that are just insanely terrible now have to get even more insanely terrible before people are going to wake up and start turning things around. And like I said, I hope, we don't end up in this whole transhuman technocratic hellscape fallen angel worship world before then. I mean, it's a real race. And there you go. We are dealing with challenges. But there's, outside of all that, I think that, if you practice spiritual hygiene, let's just say, there's just I think there's still tremendous joy and happiness and fulfillment. The challenge is to not just sort of become navel gazing, but to bring it to other people. And maybe you're going to have to do that on their terms. And maybe that's the challenge. I just look at the Apostle Paul. I mean, he was tireless, and he would argue the pagans on their own terms, tirelessly. And maybe that's what we need. We need more, we need more apostles like that. I don't know. But like I said, I can't do it. I can't do it. I wish I could. I really do wish I could. I'm not kidding. I really do wish I could, but it's just like, I can't I can't get lost in that briar patch again, because it caused, I think it caused me so much pain that I think a lot of my health problems were immensely exacerbated by it. That just the stress of it, because what I thought was my return to Eden was not. And it created a sense of just such deep disquiet in me that, I took it out on myself. So anyway, we didn't talk about synchromysticism at all. That's fine. This is much better. I'm glad, this is a lot more interesting to me and a lot more fun. Synchromysticism is a tool. It's non-sectarian. Christians can use it. It's just basically a pattern recognition tool that, I mean, I've always argued that, John of Patmos was the first synchromystic, symbolism and so on and so forth. I mean, we can talk about that more in depth at another time, but it's a very useful tool, and it helped. It kind of helped me start to put things back together, because the real enemy is dissolution and fragmentation. What we want is wholeness. I'm not talking about oneness, right? That's a different thing. I'm talking about wholeness, being whole, being healthy. And especially in a culture that wants to fragment you, that is doing all it can every day to fragment you, to break you up, to break you apart, to set you against yourself, to set you against your brothers and sisters, so on and so forth. So that is really the challenge. And the thing that synchromysticism will be useful, I think, for Christians, is that you can start to sort of put the pieces back together. And I would argue that you can start to see, the hand of God at work in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
So
Can you say just a little bit more about that? But I just want to take a moment and say again that the loss of Eden, the heartbreak over that, the frustration of being rejected, of feeling abandoned, of wanting to find a church home, of starting a young family and needing that structure and wanting that structure because it's what you grew up with and it was part of your own family and spiritual formation. It was your security. It was your structure when everything was falling apart. That's a real loss. That's a genuine grief that I think probably a lot of people feel, right? Like for example, for me coming into the church, I now have something that I've never had before. There was never any Eden. I found it for the first time. So throw the gates in, go running in and throw myself on the lawn, right? Amen, hallelujah. It's a very different thing to have had the experience where you had been in Eden and you didn't know that that's what it was. You're too young to know what it was. And so you have this memory of how church is supposed to be, which is built into us as beings, as believers, as Christians, probably as humans in general. And then and then to lose that. And again, I remember being a latchkey kid, and I haven't actually reflected on it until today, like how alienating it is to come home to an empty house and let yourself in at the end of the day. Like, how insane is that? Make
your own supper.
Yeah, exactly. And in the face of that, where you had a moment in your life, a childhood, where you had something so different and so much better. And so I can understand the grief and the disillusionment and the frustration of thinking that you would have found that at some point in time, and you go back and you find entertainment church, or you find arguments, or you find division. And it's like, I'm just trying to find a thing that, like, I didn't invent it. It was already here. Where does it exist? And the massive disillusionment and grief and the real loss that you would experience from that. So I can relate to all of that. I can understand all of that, at least. So I can't relate from my own experience, but I can understand the feeling of how that must feel for a man. And then illness and all the stuff thrown in. It's like, where is the church? And that used to be a part of my childhood. We can lose parents, we can lose relatives, but the church is supposed to be there. And then it just wasn't. And as that's happening, the church is falling away, you watch around you during the course of your own lifetime as an adult, American society degrading, degenerating, crumbling, collapsing, step by step by step by step. And I can imagine that would add to the grief and the frustration and even a sense of outrage that this thing that you had has gone totally. And when you try to show up to try and contribute, they're like, "Yeah, we don't need it." Yeah, I'd be pretty upset too.
Well, let me get synchromistic for you.
Yeah.
So I started getting interested in synchronicity, like just meaningful coincidences back in the early 90s. And I had this dream. I had this really powerful dream that my wife and a close friend of mine who was a Christian went into this church, and the pastor sort of held up this like this chalice, like the communion chalice, and it was like emitting this sort of white light, right? And it was just like, and you'd see it in like a Holy Grail movie or something, and like the church sort of had like this circular sanctuary, and it was a specific church that I used to walk by all the time that I'd never actually been in. So one Sunday, September 5th, 1993, I went to service there. And I was like, oh, wow, the church has got that sort of circular shape to it. Oh, that's interesting. And it was Communion Sunday, first Sunday, Methodists celebrate communion first Sunday of every month. And then there was this pastor there, this Jamaican gentleman, I think he was Jamaican or Barbadian. And then I realized, I don't know, I don't remember how I realized, but I realized he was the brother of the present pastor at the church I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you see that? Do you see? I feel like I'm not selling this well.
No,
so
I'm following you.
So he was the brother of the present pastor of my old Eden.
Yes.
So it's like, oh my, I refound Eden. Right. I was just like, it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe it because I had this dream, with this communion chalice and everything like that. Unfortunately, the service was just typical liberal Protestant boredom. I mean, just the boredom. Oh, it's just excruciating. And but the real killer for me is that I called the church because I was like, this is amazing. I wanted to tell them about this, and I got the assistant pastor, who was this total Karen, and she was like actively hostile to me. Like, why are you calling me? What are you talking about? Why, this is a pastor, I mean, the part of their job is, providing spiritual counseling for people, right? I mean, that's literally what they get paid for doing. And she was like, I was like a crank caller or like an obscene phone caller or something. That's how she treated me. It was a slap in the face. Like, I felt like it was, I never went back to that church, by the way, but it was a real slap in the face. I was like, I was really wounded by this because I thought I had this, like, I remember talking to my aunt that night and she's like, see, that's a sign, that's a sign from God. Right. And like, how did the the assistant pastor of this church, I don't even think I got to that point to bring that up. I was just, I forget what I was even asking her, but she made me feel like I was an obscene phone caller. And it was just so, what's even the term? Deflating? Disappointment doesn't quite do it justice. It was just like wound. It's like I was wounded, and this is a pastor. I mean, even if she maybe she was in a bad mood or something, she's got to at least go through the motions.
Well, she being a pastor is the first problem.
Yeah. But anyhow, it's just, but that was, interesting enough, that didn't get me back to my Eden, but that really started up me in my synchronistic journey, thinking about dreams, signs, symbols, signs and wonders, symbolism, synchronicity, all that kind of stuff. And maybe that was the plan. Maybe that was the plan. Like I said, sometimes I feel like the exile, exiled from Eden. And maybe that's just, my lot in life. I don't know. But there you go.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I would say that along the road, you picked up some pretty valuable information and some valuable skills. So that's my story. So I didn't come from Eden in the same way or at all, but I try to make sense of my road, right? It was, God plans his a heart of man plans his way, but God plans his steps, So that's what we started talking about. We're all just kind of finding our way and responding and reacting to situations on the ground with our own, particular blind spots and virtues, right? And as I try to make sense coming to Christ now, and I look back at my experience traveling the world and engaging in all these new age pursuits, well, clearly I have to put that into service because I was an exile in my own way, let's say. And so now, okay, well, this is what I have. This is what I can do. Is it useful? And maybe with synchromysticism, you found something similar.
Well, I've read a bit about, I've seen you talk a bit about, your experiences and so on. And that seems to be like almost like tempering.
Yeah, it was definitely that.
You know what I mean by that? Like
yeah.
Testing, tempering, strengthening, and it's, I'm not going to say it's unusual to sort of come out the other side of that, but a lot of people just get lost in that chaos world.
That's right.
And go down from there. I mean, the one thing that I've really come to appreciate, obviously from the experiences that I talked about with the drugs and so on, is that the road to hell, most people don't start off with that destination in mind.
No.
No, you kind of end up there, with that old expression, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I mean, it's really true. But I think what I've discovered, and I've seen what I've observed in other people as well, is that you've got to get your idea of self-importance out of your head. You've got to get the idea of like, I am the center, that I am the focus, that American consumerism instills in us from birth, right? And it has become toxic in the extreme now, because you will never be happy. You will never find true joy that way. You find true joy by stepping outside yourself, by getting outside your head, by stepping aside from your ego and your narcissistic fantasies. Those only bring you misery. Those only bring you to hell. Humility, and getting outside of that self orientation, again, that is such a central part of American consumerism. That's where real happiness comes from. And there's no, and I'm just sort of leading aside faith and so on, just for now. But I'm just saying, like, because there are people who do have faith but still have the ego. You see what I'm saying? And it's like, that kind of leads you away too. So I'm trying to think of a good Bible verse to back me up here, and I can't. All I can think of is like, he who humbles himself shall be exalted, and he who exalts himself should be humbled. That's the only thing I can think of.
That's a pretty good
one.
Is
that a good one?
I'll take that one. Yeah.
I told you, I've been thinking about that for 35 years, because I remember, how did I come out of the New Age thing is, I got a copy of the New Testament and I'd read it on the train every day. But the funny thing was that I'd go to this place called the East West Bookstores in New York. Did you ever go there?
I've heard of it.
Okay, big New Age bookstore. But I always sort of, there was all like, whatever, all the different varieties and stuff. And they had all the Christian books in the back corner. It's like in the back of the bus. And I always just, like I said, like being that little iron filing sort of drawn to the magnet, right? But that's when I found myself in this situation where that we talked about before, like just being completely alone. And it's, nobody wants to be alone. And I really believe that you can't have, a solid, well, I'm just going to come out and say it. I don't think you can have a solid faith on your own. I think you need community. I think you need support. Nobody can go it alone. Maybe there are like these holy men and these saints and these mystics that could go out into the wilderness and so on, like St. Anthony or somebody. You need backup. I honestly really believe that. And if you're just surrounded by hostility and or indifference, you can't do it. You need people in your corner. Especially as we're going into this world that is just so hostile on so many different levels, not only to Christians, but, as you do in your work, to men, that wants to, this empire that wants to emasculate all the men living under its aegis. Oh, so if you'll forgive me, I'm kind of like getting a little bit out of breath, so
no
I think
problem.
I'm going to have to stop talking.
No problem. If you don't mind, I just want to ask you just one more question then. So for people who are encountering synchromysticism and your work for the first time and these related subjects, what can they do to prevent themselves from going off the deep end? Because it can be the sort of thing that people can get into it and then they just go diving right off. So what advice would you provide to people who've never heard any of this stuff that sounds interesting to them? They're going in cold. How do you keep them on the rails?
I'm glad you asked me that question. It's a very important question, because a lot of times, maybe every time, when people get into it, they think, oh, this is about me. Mm-hmm. I'm the focus of this, because they find themselves dealing with this, synchronicity. And they just start to think that, it's some divine power uniquely bestowed upon them. 3 simple words. I think there's more to it, but 3 simple words I think will help. It's not about you. 4 simple words.
Okay.
4 simple words. It's not about you. It's not about you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about you. And if you're a Christian, I would say, I will use this, to serve Christ. I will use this tool, this technique, because there are Christian synchronistics, by the way. A lot of them aren't as active as they used to be, but 10, 15 years ago there were some, and they were doing interesting work. So it's not magic, it's pattern recognition. Mm-hmm. It's what all these computers that we deal with every day run on. Mm-hmm. It's symbols, pattern recognition, codes, all these kind of things. But it's not about you. And just, if you find yourself interested in it, just use it for service. Mm-hmm. Make it a part of your service. That's, I think, are the 2 best ways to avoid, because it will drive people crazy. I've seen it drive people crazy a lot. And it's kind of difficult for me, because a lot of them, believe me, over the years, a lot of these people have come to me and they've lost their minds.
Yeah.
I think they're always kind of maybe moving that way to begin with. And it's like, I kind of have to say, like, I'm not your therapist. Mm-hmm. I'm not a doctor. You need help from somebody, who's qualified to do that. But it is real. I don't know what it is. I mean, I think it's just a fundamental part of nature. I mean, Wolfgang Pauli, who was a quantum mechanics physicist, believed in it, and he believed that it was just a fundamental part of reality. Mm-hmm. I would argue that it's all over the Bible, Book of Daniel, Book of Revelation, signs and wonders. That's what they called it back then. Mm-hmm. But if you believe that God is speaking to us, he's, you should always worry if, like, you hear God talking to you, like, audibly.
Right.
God has a much broader palette to work with. Mm-hmm. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And and that's how I first approached it. And interestingly enough, I'm coming back to that realization. Mm-hmm. You might find yourself adrift, unanchored. But I don't know, just be faithful and trust God to bring you back. I think all you can do.
Amen, sir. Love it. Thank you. Yeah. Where would you like to send people to find out more about you and what you do? You made it.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to scare people, because
I'll send them your Twitter account.
It's kind of like, I don't want to drop people like in the middle of a movie,
Sure.
like in the scary parts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. I blog at secretsun.blogspot.com. I today I posted it last night, early this morning. I posted on Revelation 12.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be a good, but this is going to be airing next week. So maybe, I don't know. secretsun.blogspot.com. I am working on a book that I intend to come out in May called the Synchromystic Handbook. That is going to spell out my methodology and, my attitudes and my beliefs and so on. But there you go.
Great. Well, I look forward to that. I'll send people to your Twitter account too. You'll find us messing around on Twitter from time to time.
Yeah, Twitter is the Thunderdome. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Twitter used to be like this place where people would just like post jokes and so on, and then it got invaded by the Tumblristas, and then all the mainstream media CIA people. It is the Thunderdome. It's like I put on my armor when I go in there. It's
you
like,
have to.
You have to. I try to keep as much as my soul intact, but it's the ring. You're stepping into the ring. It's more and more so these days, and it's only going to become worse in the future. But one thing I would just like to part with is one thing that I say, because I'm fixated on the Book of Revelation because it's just this great puzzle that I'm solving, is that it has the happiest ending of any book ever. Right? Like that's, people go, oh, the Book of, apocalypse, doom and gloom, Armageddon and all this stuff. It's like, well, that's the early chapters. Read like chapter 20, 21, 22. It's like, that's the happiest ending of any book in history. So, but I think that's very real, because I think in order to, get back to the garden, you have to struggle in the wilderness. And I think that a problem, not only with like New Age kind of people where everything's sort of fluffy and light, but quite frankly, a lot of Christians, is that they don't understand that you're in a struggle. You're in a battle. The supernatural is real. It is very real. I mean, a lot of people don't want to hear that. I told him about my friend Derek Gilbert from Skywatch, and we've talked about this, is that a lot of people in a lot of churches just don't want to talk about the supernatural. They just are not comfortable with it. I mean, personally, I don't know how you can talk about Christianity without talking about the supernatural. Right. But maybe that is, when you talk about how did it all fall apart, maybe that's one of the ways it did fall apart, is that because when you take the supernatural spiritual battle aspect out of it, what are you left with? Just like a lot of like fine, nice feelings and bromides and, oh, this is a nice man who you should all emulate, That's not even half the story. You know what I mean? The story is this battle that we are all in. So whether you like it or not, whether you acknowledge it or not, it doesn't matter. Whether you're a Christian or not, whether you acknowledge it or not, you're in this battle. And what I've been trying to do with my work, particularly for the past 7 years, is show people that the battle is really heating up. Okay, so there you go.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate all your wisdom and your generosity of sharing your story, and I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was great. I knew this was going to be a good one. I don't know. I kind of like get a sense of people, and I just have always gotten like a really good sense from you. Like you just,
thank you.
You got a pure heart.
Thank you, sir. I'm honored by that. Very blessed. Thank you. Praise God.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.